The desert wind carried ash that September evening, swirling through Red Hollow like a curse looking for a place to land. Later folks would say they should have known something wicked was coming, that the dogs had gone silent, that the horses in the livery had kicked their stalls until splinters flew. But hindsight is a luxury afforded only to the living, and by the time the Quinn family heard the horses thundering up to their door, it was already too late to pray. Elara Quinn stood at the kitchen window of the small homestead 3 miles outside town, watching the sunset paint the sky the color of old blood. She was 19 years old that day, 19, and her mother had baked a blackberry pie to celebrate, using the last of their sugar ration and berries Elara had picked herself from the brambles near Copper Creek. The house smelled like home, yeast and wood smoke and her father's tobacco, the kind of warmth that makes you forget how cold the world can be. "Make a wish, sweetheart," her mother said, striking a match. Elara closed her eyes. I wish for something more than this, she thought, though she loved them fiercely. Her weathered father with his carpenter's hands, her mother who sang while she worked, her younger brother Thomas, who still believed the world was fair. I wish for a life bigger than dust and drought and these 4 walls. She would spend the rest of her life wishing she'd wished for something else. The candle flames had just begun to dance when the sound of hoofbeats shattered the evening quiet. Not the lazy clip-clop of a neighbor's mare, but the aggressive thunder of men riding hard with purpose. Her father's face changed. He'd been a soldier once, before the frontier had dulled his edges, and some instincts don't die. "Elizabeth," he said quietly, his hand already moving toward the rifle above the hearth. "Take the children to the cellar." But there wasn't time. The door exploded inward with a crash that sent splinters flying like shrapnel. 3 men poured through the opening, their faces hidden behind dark bandanas, their guns already drawn and gleaming in the lamplight. The leader was tall, his movements too fluid for mere violence. This was practiced, rehearsed, a routine he'd performed before. "Jacob Quinn," the tall one said, his voice muffled but cold as December ice. "You should have kept your mouth shut." Elara's father stepped forward, placing himself between the gunman and his family. His hands were raised, empty, pleading. "Whatever you think I know, you talked to the land surveyor. You told him about the water rights." The tall man's gun didn't waver. "Mr. Voss doesn't appreciate loose tongues." Voss. Even through her terror, Elara registered the name. Everyone in Red Hollow knew the Voss family, the land barons who owned half the county, who controlled the bank, the cattle trade, the water access. Her father had worked on their property last month, repairing fences, and he'd come home troubled, saying he'd seen things that didn't add up, documents that looked forged, water being diverted from public land. "I didn't tell him anything that wasn't true," her father said, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "If there's illegal diversion happening, there's nothing illegal when you make the laws." The tall man's laugh was like breaking glass. "But you're right about one thing, Quinn. You did tell the truth, and that's exactly the problem." The first shot made Elara's ears ring. Her father crumpled, a red bloom spreading across his chest, his eyes wide with shock. Not at dying, she would realize later, but at the senselessness of it, the casual cruelty. Her mother's scream filled the house, animal and raw, and she lunged forward, her hands reaching for her fallen husband. The second shot silenced her. Thomas, sweet 13-year-old Thomas, who collected bird feathers and dreamed of being a naturalist, bolted for the back door. He almost made it. The third shot caught him between his shoulder blades, and he fell across the threshold, half in and half out, as if even in death he was still trying to escape. Elara stood frozen, her mouth open in a scream that wouldn't come. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of horror, her father's blood pooling on the floorboards he'd sanded smooth with his own hands, her mother's body draped across his like she was still trying to protect him, Thomas's outstretched hand clutching a fistful of prairie grass from the yard, as if the earth itself had tried to pull him to safety. The tall man turned to her. Even through the bandana she could see his eyes, pale, almost colorless, the eyes of something that had forgotten how to be human. He raised his gun and time seemed to slow, the way it does in nightmares when you can see the terrible thing coming, but your legs won't move. "No witnesses," he said. The gun roared. Elara felt the impact like a punch to her temple, felt her legs give way. She fell backward, crashing into the pie table, sending the birthday cake tumbling to the floor where it shattered into blue ceramic shards and blackberry pulp. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was that pale-eyed killer holstering his weapon and turning away. "Burn it," he told his companions. "Make it look like a lamp accident. No one investigates a fire." Oh, consciousness returned in fragments, each one bringing fresh agony, pain, crushing, blinding pain radiating from her skull. The smell of smoke, not the friendly scent of the hearth, but something chemical and wrong, like burning hair and flesh. Her mother's face, inches from her own, eyes closed, blood matting her gray-streaked hair. Elara tried to scream, but managed only a wet gasp. She was trapped, pinned beneath the overturned table, her family's bodies forming a grotesque shield above her. The shooters had left her for dead, and in the chaos of toppling furniture and bodies, they'd missed confirming the kill. The house was burning. Orange light flickered through the smoke, and she could hear the greedy crackle of flames eating through the walls her father had built board by board. Heat pressed down on her like a living thing, stealing the air from her lungs. She could die here, she realized. Probably should die here, with her family, rather than face whatever came after. But something in her, some stubborn, furious part that refused to be snuffed out like a candle, began to fight. She pushed against her mother's body, sobbing apologies into the smoke, and dragged herself free. Blood ran into her eyes from the bullet graze along her temple. Just a graze, a kiss from death that had somehow missed its mark. Her vision swam, doubled, but she crawled forward anyway, toward the back door where Thomas lay. "I'm sorry," she whispered, touching her brother's cooling hand. "I'm so sorry, Tommy." The roof beam above her groaned, and she didn't look back. She crawled over the threshold, into the yard, into the night that had turned their home into a funeral pyre. Behind her, the house collapsed with a roar, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky like malevolent stars. Elara Quinn lay in the dirt and watched everything she'd ever known burn to ash. They found her at dawn, a neighbor drawn by the smoke. She was curled in the vegetable garden, covered in soot and blood, her hand clutched around something metallic. When the doctor tried to pry her fingers open, she snarled at him like a feral thing. "Let her keep it," the doctor told the sheriff's deputy, a young man named Porter who looked ready to vomit. "She's in shock." What she held was a spur, a riding spur made of engraved silver, torn from one of the killer's boots during the chaos. It bore an elaborate monogram, CV. Sheriff Hutchins arrived by mid-morning, a pot-bellied man with gin-blossom cheeks and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He stood over Elara in the doctor's office, hat in hand, performing sympathy the way a bad actor performs Shakespeare. "Terrible tragedy, Miss Quinn. Just terrible. Seems like the lamp must have tipped over during dinner. Happens more often than folks think with these dry summers." Elara stared at him through her one good eye. The other was swollen shut from the bullet's kiss. "There was no accident," she said, her voice raw from smoke. "They murdered them. 3 men. They came with guns and they killed my family." Hutchins shifted his weight, exchanged a glance with Deputy Porter. "Now, miss, I know you've been through an ordeal, but head injuries can cause confusion. Doctor says you took quite a blow." "I know what I saw." She tried to sit up, gasped as pain lanced through her ribs. "The tall one. He said a name. Voss. They killed my father because he knew something about water rights, about forgery." "Miss Quinn." The sheriff's voice hardened. "I understand you're upset, but I'll thank you not to go around making wild accusations against the most respected family in this county. The Vosses have done more for Red Hollow than any other—" "They murdered my family!" The words ripped from her throat, raw and desperate. "They shot them down like dogs and burned the house to hide it." Hutchins' face shuddered completely. He placed his hat back on his head with deliberate care. "I'll put in my report that you're suffering from head trauma and grief-induced delusions. I suggest you rest, Miss Quinn, and think very carefully before you speak such nonsense again. Words like that can ruin a young woman's reputation, or worse." The threat hung in the air between them, clear as gun smoke. Elara understood then, with a cold clarity that cut through her pain. The law in Red Hollow belonged to the Voss family. Justice was a commodity they controlled, bought and paid for, with gold and fear. She was alone. The town buried her family 3 days later, or what was left of them, charred remains in 3 pine boxes the undertaker had assembled from scrap wood, because Elara had no money for proper caskets. The service was sparsely attended. A few neighbors came, their eyes downcast, their condolences whispered like confessions. They knew, everyone knew. But knowing and speaking were different things in Red Hollow, and silence was survival. Reverend Walsh spoke about God's mysterious ways, about suffering and redemption, but Elara heard none of it. She stood at the graveside in a borrowed black dress, her head wrapped in bandages, and stared at the pine boxes while a different sermon played in her mind. 6 bullets. 4 bodies. 1 survivor who shouldn't have been. After the service, as the small crowd dispersed, a woman approached her. She was perhaps 40, with steel gray hair pulled back severely, and the kind of face that had forgotten how to soften, all angles and hardness, like a woman carved from granite. "My name is Martha Cole," she said without preamble. "I run a boarding house on Prospect Street. You'll need a place to stay." Elara blinked at her. "I have no money." "Didn't ask for money. Asked if you needed a place." Martha's eyes, sharp as flint, assessed her. "You planning to leave Red Hollow? Head east, maybe? Start over?" The question felt like a test. Elara's hand moved unconsciously to her pocket, where the silver spur pressed against her hip bone, a constant reminder, a talisman of vengeance. "No," she said softly. "I'm not leaving." Something flickered in Martha's expression, approval perhaps, or recognition. "Then you'll need somewhere to heal. Come to the boarding house. We'll figure out the rest." It wasn't charity, Elara would learn. Martha Cole didn't believe in charity, but she believed in debts, and she believed in women who refused to die quietly, and those beliefs were enough. The boarding house on Prospect Street was a weathered 2-story building that leaned slightly to the left, as if tired of standing upright. It smelled like lye soap and old coffee, and it housed an eclectic collection of women, a widowed seamstress, a former saloon girl saving money to leave town, a doctor's daughter cast out for having a baby out of wedlock. Women that Red Hollow had chewed up and spat out, women who'd learned that respectability was just another word for silence. Martha gave Elara a narrow room on the 2nd floor, barely wider than the bed it contained, with a single window overlooking the back alley. That first night, Elara lay in the darkness and listened to the sounds of the town. Piano music from the saloon 3 blocks over, horses clopping past, men's voices raised in argument or laughter, life continuing, indifferent to her grief. She pulled the silver spur from her pocket and held it in the moonlight, tracing the engraved letters with her finger. CV. She'd turned those initials over in her mind 1,000 times. The tall killer had mentioned the name Voss, a family so powerful they didn't need to hide behind anonymity, only bandanas. Calder Voss. The name had come to her through whispers at the funeral, through the doctor's slip of the tongue when he'd thought she was too drugged to listen. Calder Voss, the land baron's son, known for his cruelty and protected by his father's money, a man who could murder a family and walk free because in Red Hollow, the Voss family was the law. Elara clutched the spur until the engraved edges bit into her palm, drawing blood. She welcomed the pain. It was clean, honest, unlike the lies the sheriff had told, unlike the silence of the townspeople who knew the truth and said nothing. They think I'll leave, she thought. They think I'll run or fall apart or forget. But Elara Quinn was discovering something about herself in that narrow room, something she hadn't known existed until everything else had been burned away. She was made of iron and fury, and she would bend before she broke. Vengeance, she was learning, required patience. It required planning. It required becoming someone new, someone harder, someone willing to walk through fire to drag the guilty into the light. Outside her window, Red Hollow slept, unaware that it had birthed its own reckoning. Voss. The next weeks passed in a blur of healing and listening. Elara's body mended, the bullet graze scabbed over, her ribs stopped screaming with every breath. The swelling around her eye faded to reveal a purple-yellow bruise that made her look like a fighter who'd lost her match. But her mind sharpened with purpose. Martha put her to work in the boarding house, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes. But more importantly, she taught her to be invisible. to move through rooms without being noticed, to listen without seeming to hear. The boarding house, Elara discovered, was a nexus of information. The women who lived there had been cast out by Red Hollow's polite society, but they'd learned its secrets in the process. They knew which men beat their wives, which merchants cheated their customers, which officials took bribes. They knew where bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. And they were willing to share, once they understood Elara wasn't planning to flee. "You want to know about the Voss family?" Martha asked one night, after the other residents had gone to bed. They sat in the kitchen, drinking bitter coffee by lamplight. "It'll cost you. I have nothing to pay with. You have time. You have anger. Those are currencies too." Martha studied her across the table. "But I need to know you're serious. Going after Calder Voss is a death sentence. His father, Gerald Voss, owns this town. The land, the water rights, the bank, the cattle trade. He has the sheriff in his pocket and judges on his payroll. You're not just fighting one killer, girl. You're fighting an empire." "I know." Elara's voice was steady. "Tell me anyway." Martha nodded slowly, as if Elara had passed another test. Gerald Voss came to Red Hollow 30 years ago with nothing but ambition and a talent for cruelty. He bought up land during the drought of 2002 when farmers were desperate, paid pennies on the dollar, then waited for the rains to return. When they did, he owned half the county. He married Eleanor Pritchard, a governor's daughter, which bought him political connections. They had one son, Calder. The name tasted like ash in Elara's mouth. "Tell me about him." Calder Voss is 26 years old, and he's everything his father made him. Entitled, violent, convinced the world exists for his pleasure. He's killed before, always covered up by his father's money. A Mexican rancher who disputed a boundary line, found dead in an accident. A prospector who claimed Voss was salting mines, disappeared entirely. Your family isn't his first, Elara. They're just the most recent. "Why does no one stop him?" Martha's laugh was bitter. "Stop him with what? The law? Gerald Voss is the law. Any official who doesn't cooperate gets ruined, financially, socially, physically. 3 years ago, a county judge tried to rule against Voss in a water rights dispute. His house burned down. His daughter was run out of town with rumors she couldn't shake. The judge resigned and left the state. That's how it works here. You bow or you burn." Elara thought of her father's body, of her mother's silent scream, of Thomas falling in the doorway. Then the system needs to burn too. Maybe. Martha leaned forward, her eyes glinting in the lamplight. But you'll need more than anger. You'll need proof, allies, and skills you don't have. Can you shoot? No. Fight? No. Lie convincingly? Steal information? Seduce secrets from drunk men? No. Elara met her gaze. But I can learn. Martha smiled then, a wolf's smile with no warmth in it. Then we begin tomorrow. The education of Elara Quinn started before dawn. Martha woke her while stars still pricked the dark sky and took her to the alley behind the boarding house. In the gray pre-dawn light, she handed Elara a pistol, a snub-nosed revolver that felt heavier than it looked. "First lesson," Martha said. "In Red Hollow, an unarmed woman is a target. An armed woman is a threat. Guess which one survives?" Over the following weeks, Martha taught her to shoot. Not fancy trick shooting or showmanship, but the practical art of staying alive. How to draw quickly, how to aim for center mass, how to keep your breathing steady when your heart was trying to beat out of your chest. They practiced in the pre-dawn hours when the town was still sleeping, using empty bottles and makeshift targets in the alley. Elara's first few attempts were disasters. She flinched at the recoil, jerked the trigger, missed targets 3 feet away. But she'd learned something from watching her family die. Pain was temporary, but failure was forever. She practiced until her hands stopped shaking, until the gun became an extension of her will rather than a foreign object. "Better," Martha said after a week, watching Elara put 3 bullets through a whiskey bottle at 15 paces. "But shooting targets and shooting men are different things. Can you do it? When the time comes, when you're looking Calder Voss in the face, can you pull the trigger?" Elara thought of pale eyes behind a bandana, of her father's blood pooling on floorboards, of Thomas's outstretched hand. "Yes," she said simply. The other women in the boarding house contributed their own lessons. Rose, the former saloon girl, taught her how to read men, their tells and weaknesses, how to spot a lie in a poker face, how to make herself forgettable or memorable depending on what the situation required. "Men see what they expect to see," Rose explained. "You want to be invisible? Act like a mouse. You want to be remembered? Become whatever they're looking for." Clara, the doctor's daughter, taught her basic medicine. How to stitch a wound, set a broken bone, recognize poison symptoms. "If you're planning war," Clara said quietly, "you'll need to know how to keep people alive, including yourself." And Dolores, the seamstress, transformed her appearance. "You can't walk around looking like a victim," she said bluntly, studying Elara's gaunt frame and hollow eyes. "You need to become someone else, someone stronger." She cut Elara's long brown hair to shoulder length, gave her a dress that fit properly, dark green instead of mourning black, practical instead of decorative. More importantly, she taught Elara how to carry herself differently, shoulders back, spine straight, eyes that met challenges instead of sliding away. "You're not the girl who lost everything anymore," Dolores said, pinning up a hem. "You're the woman who's going to take everything back." 6 weeks after the massacre, Elara walked into Red Hollow's main street for the first time since the funeral. The town was larger than she'd realized from her family's isolated homestead. 2 main streets lined with false-fronted buildings, side alleys that twisted like secrets, a railroad depot at the north end that brought money and strangers in equal measure. The heart of Red Hollow was the town square, where the bank, the land office, and the courthouse formed a triumvirate of power. And towering over it all, both literally and figuratively, was the Voss building, a 3-story structure of red brick and ambition, housing Gerald Voss's land empire headquarters, his private offices, and according to rumor, his son's living quarters. Elara stood across the street from it, her new dress catching the wind, her hand resting on the pistol hidden beneath her shawl. This close, she could see people coming and going, clerks with ledgers, ranchers seeking audiences, women in expensive dresses who moved with the confidence of those who'd never feared anything in their lives. "You're staring." Elara turned to find Martha beside her carrying a basket of vegetables from the market. To any observer, they were simply 2 women running errands. "I want to see him," Elara said quietly. "Calder Voss. I need to know what he looks like." "You'll have your chance. He's a creature of habit." Martha nodded toward the saloon at the end of the street, the Silver Dollar, its sign proclaimed in faded gold letters. "Every Saturday night, he drinks there, plays cards, picks fights, takes women upstairs who don't always come down looking the same. If you want to see a monster in his natural habitat, that's where you'll find him." Saturday was 3 days away. Elara committed it to memory like a sacred date. "I'll be there." "You'll be careful," Martha corrected. "Observing isn't the same as engaging. You're not ready to face him yet." "When will I be ready?" Martha's expression was unreadable. "Maybe never. Maybe that's not the point. Come on, we have groceries to carry." But as they walked away, Elara glanced back at the Voss building one more time. Somewhere in there, behind brick walls and locked doors, was the man who'd destroyed her life, the man who thought he'd left no witnesses. "Soon," she promised herself, "soon you'll learn what it means to leave one alive." Saturday night arrived with a dust storm, not unusual for Red Hollow, where the wind seemed to carry grudges from one season to the next. Elara stood outside the Silver Dollar, listening to the piano music and laughter spilling through the swinging doors, working up the nerve to enter. She dressed carefully, the green dress, her hair pinned up, just enough powder to hide the last traces of her bruising. She looked respectable but not memorable, a woman who could be anyone's daughter or sister or wife. Rose had coached her on how to act in a saloon, where to sit, how to order, how to watch without seeming to stare. "Don't make eye contact," Rose had warned. "Don't smile. Don't engage. You're there to observe, nothing more. Men in places like that, they take interest as invitation." Elara pushed through the doors. The interior was thick with smoke and noise. Men crowded around poker tables, women in low-cut dresses working the room, a bartender polishing glasses with mechanical efficiency. A piano player hammered out a jaunty tune in the corner, though no one seemed to be listening. The air smelled like whiskey, sweat, and something darker underneath, the particular stench of violence waiting to happen. She found a table in the back corner, ordered a sarsaparilla from a passing girl, and settled in to watch. Calder Voss arrived an hour later, and Elara knew him instantly. He was tall, at least 6 feet, with the kind of broad-shouldered build that came from a life of physical ease rather than labor. His hair was sandy brown, swept back from a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruel set of his mouth and the cold calculation in his pale eyes. Those eyes. Even from across the room she recognized them, the colorless, inhuman gaze of the man who'd murdered her family. He moved through the saloon like he owned it, which he probably did, indirectly. Men stepped aside to let him pass, their laughter a beat too loud, their deference a beat too quick. He was accompanied by 2 other men, likely the same ones who'd been with him that night, though their faces had been covered. They flanked him like guard dogs as he took a seat at the best poker table, the one near the window where everyone could see him. Elara's hand trembled as she gripped her glass. Every instinct screamed at her to pull the pistol from her bag, to walk across that room and put bullets between those pale eyes, to end it here and now. But Martha's voice echoed in her head. Not yet. You're not ready. She watched instead, and she learned. Calder Voss played poker the way he probably did everything, with arrogant carelessness, winning through intimidation rather than skill. When he lost a hand, he accused the winner of cheating. When he won, he gloated. He drank steadily, his face flushing red, his voice growing louder and more abrasive with each glass. To family fortunes, he declared at one point, raising his whiskey in a mock toast. His companions laughed, though the sound was uneasy. May they always come easy and leave others weeping. Elara's nails bit into her palms. Easy. He'd called murdering her family easy. Around midnight, a young cowboy, couldn't have been more than 20, made the mistake of winning 3 hands in a row. Calder's face darkened. You're cheating, he said flatly. I'm not, Mr. Voss, I swear. The cowboy's voice cracked with fear. Nobody beats me 3 times unless they're cheating. Calder stood, his chair scraping back. Empty your pockets. Mr. Voss, please. The first punch came so fast the cowboy didn't see it. Calder's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling backward into another table. Cards and chips flew. Women screamed. The piano player stopped mid-song. Calder was on him in an instant, raining down blows with methodical precision. Face, ribs, kidneys. The cowboy tried to protect himself, curling into a ball, but Calder just kept hitting him, his pale eyes bright with something like joy. Please, the cowboy sobbed. Please stop. No one intervened. The bartender looked away. The other patrons found their drinks suddenly fascinating. Even the women who'd been laughing moments ago went silent, their faces carefully blank. This was Red Hollow, and this was a Voss. You didn't interfere. Finally, when the cowboy was a bleeding heap on the floor, Calder straightened, flexing his bruised knuckles. Anyone else want to try their luck? He asked the room. Silence. That's what I thought. He turned to his companions. Get him out of here. If he files a complaint, you know what to do. They dragged the unconscious cowboy out the back door, leaving a blood trail across the sawdust floor. The piano player started up again, a different tune this time, faster and more forced. Conversations resumed, though quieter now, subdued. Calder Voss returned to his table and ordered another drink, as if nothing had happened. Elara sat frozen in her corner, watching this monster who wore a human face, who could beat a man senseless and go back to his cards without a flicker of remorse. This was the man she would have to face. This was the man she would have to destroy. And she had no idea how. She stayed until the saloon closed, memorizing everything. The way Calder moved, the men he trusted, the rhythm of his cruelty. When she finally stumbled back to the boarding house, dawn was breaking, and Martha was waiting in the kitchen. Well? Martha asked. Elara sat down heavily. Her whole body felt like it was vibrating, a tuning fork struck by horror and rage. He's worse than I imagined, worse than the stories. She struggled for words. He's a monster who thinks he's a god. Most monsters do. Martha poured her coffee, black and bitter. Did you learn anything useful? He's protected, always has men with him. The whole town's afraid of him. They'd rather look away than risk his attention. Elara wrapped her hands around the hot cup, seeking its warmth. How do I fight that? How do I fight a whole town's fear? You don't fight fear. You give people something stronger to hold on to. Martha's gaze was sharp. But first, you need leverage, evidence, proof that even the Voss money can't bury. Your word against his is worth nothing. You need documents, witnesses, something that makes the truth undeniable. How do I get that? The same way you get anything in Red Hollow. You trade for it. Information for information, favors for favors. You find people who have as much reason to hate the Vosses as you do, and you build alliances. Martha leaned forward. There's a man you need to meet. Name's Samuel Fletcher. He used to be the land office clerk until he noticed some irregularities in the Voss property deeds. He tried to report it, got fired for his trouble. Last I heard, he was working at the telegraph office, keeping his head down. You think he'd help me? I think he'd help himself if you gave him the right motivation. The Vosses ruined his career, made him a pariah. Men like that, they carry grudges like loaded guns. You just need to point them in the right direction. Elara nodded slowly, her mind already working through possibilities. This was the beginning, she realized. Not the revenge itself, but the foundation. The slow, careful work of building a case, gathering allies, creating a network of truth in a town built on lies. There's something else, Martha said quietly. Something you need to understand before you go any further. Calder Voss isn't acting alone. His father, Gerald, he's the real power. Calder's just the trigger finger, but Gerald's the brain. If you want to truly bring them down, you'll need to expose both of them, which means getting inside their world, close enough to see how they operate. How? Martha's smile was grim. That's what we'll figure out, but it won't be quick and it won't be easy. Are you prepared for that? For months, maybe years, of living in the shadows, waiting for your moment? Elara thought of her family's graves, of the silver spur in her pocket, of Calder Voss's pale eyes gleaming with pleasure as he beat a man senseless. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. Then we have work to do. What? The weeks that followed established a new pattern for Elara's life, a double existence split between her public face and her secret purpose. By day, she was a boarding house worker, unremarkable and forgettable, serving meals and scrubbing floors and fading into the background of Red Hollow's daily life. She learned the rhythms of the town, where people went and when, which alleys were shortcuts and which were traps. She made herself invisible. By night, she became something else. Martha's network, she discovered, was extensive, a web of women and outcasts who traded in secrets the way respectable folks traded in cattle. Through them, Elara learned which officials took bribes, which businesses were fronts for less legal enterprises, which families had skeletons hidden so deep they'd kill to keep them buried. And slowly, patiently, she began to piece together the truth about the Voss Empire. Samuel Fletcher proved to be her first real ally. She found him at the telegraph office on a Tuesday afternoon, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the hunted look of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. When she mentioned the land office irregularities, his eyes sharpened. Who told you about that? Someone who thinks you deserve better than what happened to you. He studied her for a long moment. I know you. You're Jacob Quinn's daughter, the one who survived the fire. It wasn't a fire. I know. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I know what you think happened. I know who you think did it, and if you're smart, you'll stop thinking about it and leave this town before you end up like your father. My father tried to tell the truth. That's why he's dead. Elara leaned closer. You tried to do the same thing. The difference is you're still alive. We could help each other. Help each other do what? Get killed? Expose them. Gerald and Calder Voss. I know they're falsifying land deeds, diverting water rights, using violence to silence anyone who notices. You have the documents that prove it, or you know where they are. I have the motivation to see this through. She met his eyes. Together, we might actually survive it. Fletcher looked away, his hands trembling slightly. Even if I wanted to help you, which I'm not saying I do, the documents are locked in the Voss building. Gerald keeps anything incriminating in his private office on the third floor. You'd need to break in, crack a safe, and get out without being caught. It's impossible. Everything's impossible until someone does it. He laughed, sharp, bitter. You're either very brave or very stupid, Miss Quinn. Maybe both. She stood to leave, but paused. Think about it. If you change your mind, come to the boarding house on Prospect Street. Ask for Martha Cole. She left him there, staring at the telegraph machine, his expression unreadable. That night, lying in her narrow room, Elara pulled out the silver spur and held it to the lamplight. The engraved CV seemed to mock her, so close to the truth, yet still so far from justice. Breaking into the Voss building was suicide. Fletcher was right about that. She had no experience with safe cracking, no tools, no detailed knowledge of the building's layout. But she had time, and she had a growing network of allies who each possessed skills she needed to learn. Patience, she reminded herself. This isn't a single gunfight, it's a siege. 3 weeks later, Samuel Fletcher appeared at the boarding house. He came after dark, his hat pulled low, and asked for Martha with the nervous energy of a man stepping off a cliff. When Elara joined them in the kitchen, he looked at her with a mixture of resignation and defiance. I did some thinking, he said without preamble, about what you said, about surviving. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is a partial floor plan of the Voss building. I worked there long enough to memorize the layout. Gerald's office is here, third floor, southwest corner. There's a safe built into the wall behind his desk, combination lock, but I never learned the combination. Elara unfolded the paper, studying the careful pencil lines. What changed your mind? 2 days ago, I saw Calder Voss beat a Mexican ranch hand nearly to death outside the saloon. The man's crime? Looking at him wrong. Fletcher's jaw tightened. No one stopped him. No one helped. We just watched. And I realized I'm tired of watching. I'm tired of being afraid. If you're serious about taking them down, I'm in. Because somebody needs to try, even if we fail. Martha nodded slowly, approval in her eyes. Then we plan. Carefully. Methodically. No rushing in half-ready. They spread the floor plan across the kitchen table and began to strategize. The Voss building had guards, 2 at night, 1 patrolling the first floor, 1 stationed near the rear entrance. The third floor was accessible by a main staircase, 2 exposed, or a back stairwell used primarily for deliveries, narrow but possible. The safe was the real problem. Without the combination, they'd need a safecracker, which meant finding one and convincing them to risk the wrath of the Voss family. I might know someone, Martha said slowly. A man named Edwin Cross used to work as a locksmith before he developed a taste for other people's property. He's been lying low since he got out of territorial prison last year. If I can convince him there's profit in this— There's no profit, Elara interrupted. This is about justice, not money. Justice doesn't pay the rent, girl. You want his help, you'll need to offer something tangible. Information he can use, maybe. Protection. A way out of Red Hollow when this is done. They argued logistics until the early hours. Timing, routes, contingencies. What would happen if they were caught? The enormity of what they were planning settled over Elara like a weight. This wasn't target practice in an alley anymore. This was real, and if they failed, they'd all end up in unmarked graves somewhere in the desert. But the alternative, doing nothing, letting her family's murders go unavenged, allowing the Voss empire to continue crushing everyone in its path, that was worse than any risk. We do this right, Martha said finally, or we don't do it at all, which means weeks, maybe months, of preparation. Can you wait that long? Elara thought of her father's face in the lamplight, of her mother's scream, of Thomas falling. I've waited this long, she said quietly. I can wait longer, as long as it takes. Achad. The winter came to Red Hollow with unusual ferocity, bringing wind that cut like knives and cold that crept through every crack in the boarding house's walls. Elara spent those frozen months building her network, one careful conversation at a time. Edwin Cross proved easier to recruit than expected, not because he believed in justice, but because he hated the Voss family with a passion that bordered on obsession. Gerald Voss bought the judge who sent me to prison, he explained, his scarred hands working a practice lock with casual expertise. Wanted me out of the way because I'd stumbled onto some information about his real estate deals. I've been waiting 3 years for a chance to return the favor. He agreed to crack the safe in exchange for half of whatever documents they found that might be valuable for blackmail purposes. Martha negotiated him down to a quarter, plus safe passage to California when the job was done. They practiced in the boarding house basement, Edwin teaching Elara the basics of lockpicking, not because she needed to crack the safe, but because skills multiplied chances of survival. She learned to feel the tumblers through her fingertips, to listen for the tiny clicks that meant progress, to work in darkness because lamplight would give them away. Rose contributed intelligence about the guards' schedules. One of them was a regular customer at the saloon, and through careful conversation over drinks, she learned he took a smoke break every night at midnight behind the building, leaving the rear entrance unwatched for 10 minutes. Not much time, but maybe enough. Clara prepared a medical kit in case anyone got hurt: bandages, laudanum for pain, tools for extracting bullets. "I'm not coming with you," she said firmly, "but I'll be here when you get back, if you get back." And Dolores sewed them dark clothes suitable for night work. No rustling fabric, no decorative buttons that might catch light, everything designed for silence and shadow. Through it all, Elara trained. She ran the alleys until her lungs burned, building stamina. She practiced drawing her pistol until it was faster than thought. She studied the Voss building from every angle, memorizing sight lines and blind spots, timing the guards' patterns down to the second. But more than physical preparation, she worked on something harder: controlling her rage. Because every time she saw Calder Voss, and she saw him often now, making a point to be where he was, studying him like a naturalist studies a dangerous species. She wanted to pull the trigger. Her hand would move toward the gun, her breathing would quicken, and she'd have to force herself to turn away. "Revenge is a dish best served cold," Martha told her one night, watching Elara shake with suppressed fury after seeing Calder swagger past. "Hot revenge is just suicide with extra steps. You need to be ice, girl. Ice doesn't burn, it cuts." "I don't know if I can be cold enough." "Then learn. Because the moment you let emotion drive your actions instead of strategy, you'll die. And everything you've worked for dies with you." It was harsh advice, but it was true. So Elara learned to breathe through her rage, to let it fuel her patience instead of her recklessness. She imagined her anger as something she could store, like ammunition, saving it for the moment when it would finally be useful. Spring arrived in March, bringing warmer nights and new possibilities. They set the date for the infiltration. April 15th, a Tuesday, when Gerald Voss would be in the territorial capital on business, taking Calder and most of his regular security with him. The building would be as vulnerable as it ever got, which still meant armed guards and locked doors, but it was the best chance they'd have. The night before, Elara couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the boarding house settle around her, and wondered if this was how soldiers felt before battle, this mixture of anticipation and dread, of readiness and terror. She thought about her family, about the life she'd had before that September night. Sometimes it felt like another person's memories, someone softer and more innocent who'd believed the world made sense. That girl was dead, buried in the ashes of the Quinn homestead. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe you had to die inside before you could be reborn into something strong enough to face monsters. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Martha entered without waiting for an answer, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "Thought you might need this, sis," she said, pouring 2 fingers into each glass. They drank in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Martha spoke. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. Your father would be proud of you." Elara's throat tightened. "He'd probably tell me I'm being reckless." "Probably. Parents always think their children should be safer than brave. But he'd still be proud." Martha's gaze was steady. "You could have run. Most people would have. You chose to stand instead. That takes a kind of courage most folks never find. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Martha raised her glass. "To tomorrow. May it bring either justice or a quick death, nothing in between." They clinked glasses and Elara drank, feeling the whiskey burn down her throat like liquid fire. Tomorrow, she would break into the heart of the Voss Empire. Tomorrow, she would either find the proof she needed to destroy them, or she would die trying. Either way, The waiting was almost over. April 15th dawned clear and cold, the kind of day that promised warmth by noon but delivered frost at night. Elara spent it in forced normalcy, scrubbing floors, serving lunch, mending sheets, while her mind ran through the plan over and over, looking for holes they might have missed. At 11:30 p.m., she met Edwin Cross and Samuel Fletcher in the alley behind the boarding house. They were dressed in dark clothes, faces shadowed by hat brims, looking like exactly what they were, criminals preparing to commit a crime. "Last chance to back out," Edwin said, not unkindly. Elara checked her pistol, chambered around. "I'm not backing out." They moved through Red Hollow's back streets like ghosts, staying in shadows, avoiding the main roads where late-night drunks and deputies might spot them. The town felt different at this hour, hostile, watchful, as if the buildings themselves were waiting to see who would survive the night. The Voss building loomed ahead, its red brick turned black by darkness, windows like dead eyes. A single lamp burned on the first floor, marking the interior guard's position. They circled to the rear entrance and waited. Midnight arrived. Right on schedule, the rear guard stepped outside, lit a cigarette, and leaned against the wall with the relaxed posture of a man who'd never imagined his routine might be known. They had 10 minutes. Edwin went first, picking the door lock with swift efficiency. 3 seconds, maybe 4, before the tumblers clicked. The door swung open silently, well-oiled hinges whispering instead of creaking. They slipped inside into a dark hallway that smelled like dust and old paper. The back stairwell was exactly where Fletcher's floor plan had indicated, narrow and steep, designed for servants and deliveries rather than dignified use. They climbed in single file, each step careful, testing for squeaks before committing weight. Second floor. Third floor. A hallway lined with closed office doors, moonlight streaming through windows at the far end. Fletcher led them to the southwest corner, to a door that looked exactly like all the others, except for the brass nameplate, Gerald Voss, proprietor. Edwin knelt before the lock. This one took longer, 30 seconds, 40, while Elara and Fletcher stood guard, ears straining for any sound of discovery. Sweat ran down Elara's spine despite the cold. Click. They were in. Gerald Voss's office was exactly what Elara had imagined, expensive, ostentatious, a monument to wealth accumulated through ruthlessness. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, shelves lined with law books that had probably never been read. And behind the desk, barely visible in the moonlight, a painting of a mountain landscape that was just slightly crooked. Edwin approached it, running his fingers along the frame's edge until he found the hidden latch. The painting swung outward, revealing the safe, a steel circle with a combination dial gleaming dully. "This is the tricky part," Edwin whispered, pressing his ear against the metal. "Quiet now. I need to listen." Time crawled. Every second felt like an hour while Edwin worked, his fingers delicate on the dial, adjusting and readjusting, listening for tumblers falling into alignment. Elara divided her attention between the hallway and the office, her hand never leaving her pistol grip. 5 minutes. 7. 10. "Come on," Fletcher breathed. "Shut up," Edwin hissed. "I'm close. Yes." The final tumbler fell. The safe door swung open with a sound like a sigh, revealing stacks of documents, cash, and a small pistol that Gerald apparently kept for emergencies. Edwin reached past it all, pulling out folder after folder and handing them to Fletcher, who quickly sorted through them by moonlight. "Land deeds," Fletcher whispered. "Forged signatures. Look, here's a Hernandez deed where the ink color doesn't match. And water rights transfers that predate the official registry by weeks. And Jesus Christ!" He held up a leather-bound ledger. "This is a record of payments to officials, judges, sheriffs, even the territorial governor's office. Every bribe documented." "Why would he keep evidence of his own crimes?" Elara asked. "Insurance," Edwin said grimly. "Make sure the people he's bribing stay bought. They know he has proof they're corrupt. It's mutually assured destruction." Until now, Fletcher was already stuffing documents into his satchel. "This is everything we need, more than enough to..." The sound of boots on stairs froze them all. Someone was coming up, heavy footsteps moving fast, accompanied by voices. The guard must have come back early, or someone had noticed the open door, or they'd just run out of luck. Out! Edwin whispered urgently, closing the safe, swinging the painting back into place. Backstairs now! They ran for the door, but it was too late. Lamplight flooded the hallway, and a voice bellowed, "Who's up there?" Fletcher sprinted for the back stairs. Edwin followed. But Elara, in her haste, knocked into a coat rack that toppled with a crash that sounded like thunder in the silence. The guard rounded the corner, gun drawn, and time seemed to fracture into 1,000 desperate moments. Elara pulled her pistol, but the guard was faster. His shot boomed in the enclosed space, the bullet punching through the wall inches from her head. She fired back, not aiming, just shooting, and saw him stagger as her bullet caught his shoulder. "Go!" Edwin was screaming from the stairwell. "Go!" She ran, legs pumping, lungs burning, the guard's shouts echoing behind her along with more footsteps, reinforcements arriving, the whole building waking up. Down the back stairs, 3 steps at a time, nearly falling, catching herself on the railing. First floor. The rear door was ahead, still open, night air rushing in like freedom. But between her and escape stood another guard, this one younger and faster, blocking the exit with his body and his gun. His eyes went wide when he saw her, recognition flickering across his face, though she didn't know him. And for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Elara threw herself sideways as he fired, the bullet whining past her ear so close she felt its heat. She landed hard, rolled, came up shooting. Her first shot missed. Her second didn't, caught him in the leg, and he went down screaming. She vaulted over him and burst into the alley where Edwin and Fletcher were already running. Behind her, the Voss building was erupting into chaos. Lamps being lit, men shouting, more shots fired into the darkness. They ran through Red Hollow's back alleys like the pursued, because that's what they were now. The sound of pursuit echoed off walls, horses being saddled, dogs being released, the whole machinery of the Voss Empire mobilizing to hunt them down. At a crossroads, they split up, Edwin peeling off toward the railroad depot, Fletcher toward the residential district. Elara ran for the boarding house, her lungs screaming, her hand still clutching her pistol. She made it with minutes to spare. Martha was waiting at the back door, her face grim but unsurprised. Inside. Now. They'll search house to house by dawn. Elara stumbled into the kitchen, gasping, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. "We got it. The documents. Fletcher has them. I know. He's hiding them now." Martha was already moving, pouring water, laying out fresh clothes. "You need to clean up, change. Look like you've been here sleeping all night. If they come, when they come, you're just a boarding house worker who doesn't know anything about anything." Elara washed the gun smoke from her hands, changed into a nightgown, forced her breathing to slow. Outside, she could hear the search beginning. Horses clopping past, men shouting questions, doors being pounded on. The knock on the boarding house door came at 2 a.m. Sheriff Hutchins stood on the threshold with 4 deputies, his face hard as granite. "We're searching for burglars. Someone broke into the Voss building tonight. You see or hear anything unusual?" Martha met his gaze without flinching. "Sheriff, it's 2 in the morning. We've all been asleep. Mind if we look around?" "I mind, but I doubt that'll stop you." They searched the boarding house top to bottom, every room, every closet, even the root cellar. Elara sat on her bed in her nightgown, hair disheveled, blinking sleepily at the deputy who searched her room. He found nothing. The pistol was hidden in a hole beneath the floorboards, her dark clothes already burned in the kitchen stove. "You look familiar," the deputy said, studying her face. "Don't I know you?" "I work here," Elara said, her voice small and afraid, not hard to fake, with her heart hammering. "I serve meals sometimes. Maybe you've seen me." He grunted, unsatisfied but lacking evidence, and moved on. They left empty-handed, but Hutchins paused at the door. "Tell your girls to be careful," he said to Martha. "There's dangerous men on the loose tonight. We'll be watching this part of town extra close." It was a threat, barely disguised. He suspected, even if he couldn't prove. After they left, the boarding house remained silent for a long time. Then, slowly, women emerged from their rooms. Rose, Clara, Dolores, others, gathering in the kitchen like survivors, checking to see who'd made it through the battle. "Did we get it?" Rose asked quietly. "Was it worth the risk?" Martha looked at Elara, who nodded. "We got it. Every dirty secret, every forged document, every bribed official. Gerald Voss kept records of everything. Then what now? Elara pulled the silver spur from her pocket, her talisman, her reminder, and set it on the table. Now we figure out how to use it, because having evidence isn't the same as getting justice, not in a town where the law belongs to the people we're trying to expose. So we find someone who can't be bought, Clara suggested. In Red Hollow? Rose laughed bitterly. Good luck. But Martha was thinking, her expression distant. There might be a way. The territorial governor, he's appointed by Washington, not elected locally. The Vosses have influence with him, sure, but they don't own him outright. If we could get these documents to him, along with testimony, witnesses, he'd bury it, Fletcher said from the doorway. He'd slipped in through the back while they were talking. Or he'd sell us out to save his own skin. Politicians are all the same. Maybe, Martha conceded. But what if we gave him no choice? What if we made it public? Took the documents to a newspaper, got the story printed where everyone could see it? The Red Hollow Gazette is owned by Voss business partners, Elara pointed out. Not Red Hollow, Santa Fe, or Denver, somewhere with papers that aren't on the Voss payroll. Martha's eyes gleamed with something that might have been hope or might have been madness. We expose them so thoroughly, so publicly, that even their money can't buy silence. We make the truth so loud it drowns out their lies. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but they'd already broken into the Voss building and lived to tell about it. At this point, impossible was just another word for difficult. Then we'll need to get the documents out of Red Hollow, Elara said, along with anyone who can testify. Fletcher, Edwin, anyone else who has first-hand knowledge of their crimes. And you, Martha added, you're the witness to murder. Your testimony about what happened to your family, combined with these documents, that's the story that'll make headlines. Elara nodded slowly. She'd been hiding for months, invisible and patient, gathering her strength. But hiding was over. If they were going to destroy the Voss Empire, she'd have to step into the light, put her face and name on the accusations. She'd have to stop being a ghost and become a reckoning instead. How long do we have? She asked. Days, Martha said grimly. Maybe less. They'll be looking for whoever took those documents, and they'll eventually figure out it was us. We need to move fast. Outside, Red Hollow slept, or pretended to, but Elara could feel the town holding its breath, waiting to see what dawn would bring. The first battle had been fought. They'd landed a blow against the Voss Empire. Now came the hard part, surviving the war that would inevitably follow. Dawn broke over Red Hollow with the kind of blood-red sky that old-timers claim meant violence was coming. Elara stood at her window watching the sun climb, knowing they had perhaps 48 hours before the Voss family pieced together who'd robbed them and came hunting with everything they had. She hadn't slept. None of them had. The boarding house felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark, every creak of the floorboards making hands jump toward hidden weapons, every passing horse outside drawing worried glances. Martha appeared in her doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes still sharp. Fletcher's making copies of the documents. Says he can have duplicates ready by tonight. 1 set to hide here, 1 set to take with us when we run. We're not running, Elara said quietly. The hell we're not. Girl, they'll kill every person in this house if they think it'll lead them to those papers. Pride is a luxury we can't afford. I'm not talking about pride. Elara turned from the window. I'm talking about leverage. If we run now, we're fugitives. They'll hunt us down one by one. But if we stay, if we make ourselves visible and dangerous, if we let them know that killing us means those documents go public automatically, she let the implication hang. Martha's expression shifted from concern to calculation. Mutually assured destruction. Make ourselves too dangerous to eliminate quietly. Exactly. We need to be a bomb they're afraid to defuse. That's assuming they're rational enough to be afraid. Calder Voss doesn't strike me as a man who thinks through consequences. No, Elara agreed, but his father does. Gerald Voss built an empire through careful strategy, not blind rage. He'll understand what we're holding, and he'll understand what it costs him if we die. A knock on the front door interrupted them. Sharp, urgent, not the authoritative pounding of law enforcement. Martha descended the stairs cautiously, one hand on the derringer she kept in her apron pocket, while Elara followed close behind. The man on the doorstep was Edwin Cross, his face pale beneath a spreading bruise along his jaw. Blood stained his collar. "Let me in," he gasped. "They're right behind me." They pulled him inside and Martha slammed the door, throwing the bolt. Through the window, Elara could see two riders approaching, not deputies, but the kind of hard men who got paid in cash to ask no questions and leave no witnesses. "Upstairs," Martha hissed. "All of you, and stay quiet." The women of the boarding house vanished like smoke, years of practice making them experts at becoming invisible when dangerous men came calling. Elara wanted to stay, to face whatever came, but Martha's grip on her arm was iron. "Not yet," Martha whispered. "Pick your battles. This isn't the one." They hid in Clara's room while the pounding started on the door below, aggressive, demanding. Martha's voice drifted up, all innocence and confusion. "Can I help you, gentlemen? We're looking for a man. Thin, scarred hands, probably bleeding. Seen anyone like that?" "Can't say I have. Perhaps you should try the doctor's office." "Perhaps you should stop lying to us, old woman." The sound of wood splintering made Elara's hand move toward her pistol, but Rose grabbed her wrist, shaking her head frantically. Boots thundered on the stairs, doors began slamming open. The searchers weren't being careful anymore, weren't pretending this was legal or sanctioned. Clara's door flew open and one of the men stood there, all muscle and meanness, his hand already reaching for his gun when he saw them. 4 women huddled together, eyes wide with fear that wasn't entirely faked. "Where is he?" the man demanded. "Where's who?" Clara's voice trembled perfectly. Don't play stupid. The safe cracker. We tracked him here." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara insisted, and the man's face darkened with rage. He took a step into the room, and Elara saw his intent in his eyes. He was going to hurt them until someone talked, consequences be damned. The gunshot from downstairs made everyone freeze. "You boys are trespassing," Martha's voice carried up the stairs, cold and steady. "And the next one who touches one of my girls gets a bullet somewhere more permanent. Now get out of my house before I decide you're both too dangerous to leave breathing." A long silence. Then Boots retreating, slowly, the men clearly weighing whether an old woman with a gun was a bluff they wanted to call. The front door slammed. Hoofbeats receded into the distance. Elara sagged against the wall, her heart hammering. That had been close. Too close. If Martha hadn't been armed, if those men had been more committed, if any of a dozen variables had gone differently, she found Martha in the kitchen, reloading her derringer with hands that shook slightly, the only sign of fear the old woman would permit herself. Edwin sat at the table, pressing a rag to his bleeding temple. "They caught up to me at the depot," he explained without being asked. "Must have had watchers at every exit point from the building. Beat me pretty good before I managed to slip away. I think I lost them in the alleys, but..." He gestured at his current state. Clearly not well enough. "They'll be back," Martha said flatly, "with more men and meaner intentions. We've maybe 6 hours before they organize a real search, one the sheriff will pretend to supervise to make it look legal." "Then we move up the timeline," Elara decided. "Fletcher, how far are you on those copies?" Samuel Fletcher emerged from the cellar where he'd been working, his fingers black with ink. "Maybe 70% done. I need at least another 8 hours to finish properly." "You've got 4. Do what you can. Prioritize the most damning documents, the murder-for-hire agreements, the forged deeds with obvious discrepancies, the bribe ledgers with the biggest names." Elara's mind was racing, pieces falling into place. "Martha, we need to get a message to the territorial governor's office, someone they won't suspect. I know a freighter who runs supplies to Santa Fe weekly. He owes me a favor, and he's got no love for the Vosses. They tried to muscle in on his contracts last year." Martha was already moving toward the door. "But we'd need to pay him enough to make the risk worthwhile." "How much?" "More than we have." Elara thought of the safe in Gerald Voss's office, of the cash they'd seen but left behind. "Then we'll have to find it somewhere else. What about the silver spur? It's engraved, probably valuable." "That's evidence?" Fletcher interrupted. "You can't sell evidence." "Evidence doesn't matter if we're all dead before we can present it." But even as Elara said it, she knew she couldn't part with the spur. It was more than evidence. It was a promise, a piece of her family's blood crystallized into metal. She'd burn before she'd trade it for anything. Rose spoke up from the doorway. I might have a solution. There's a cattle buyer from Denver staying at the hotel. I know him from my saloon days. He's got money, and he hates the Voss family for reasons he's never explained. If I asked him pretty, he might front us what we need. What's his price? Rose's smile was bitter. With men like that, there's always a price. But I've paid worse for less important things. Martha's hand landed on Rose's shoulder. You don't have to. Yes, I do. We all do. This isn't just about Elara anymore, is it? It's about every person in this town who's been crushed under the Voss boot, every family they've ruined, every life they've destroyed. If my pride is the cost of bringing them down. She straightened, lifting her chin. Then it's a bargain. Elara felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that she wasn't alone anymore, that this fight had become bigger than personal vengeance. These women, this makeshift family forged in the boarding house's shadows, they were risking everything, not for her, but for the possibility of a town freed from fear. Rose, she started, but Rose cut her off. Don't make it heroic or noble. I'm doing this because I'm tired of being afraid. And because if we pull this off, maybe I can walk down the street without men looking at me like I'm something they own. That's not heroism. That's just finally being angry enough to fight back. Shit. The hours that followed blurred into frantic preparation. Fletcher worked in the cellar, his hands flying over document after document, copying Gerald Voss's neat script with forger's precision. Edwin cleaned himself up and disappeared into Red Hollow's underworld to warn others who might be targeted. Former Voss employees with grievances, families who'd lost land to fraudulent claims, anyone who might need to run or hide before the hammer fell. Rose left for the hotel wearing her most careful smile and her least comfortable dress. Dolores pressed clothing into bags for their eventual flight, practical travel gear that could survive hard riding. Clara assembled medical supplies with grim efficiency, preparing for casualties she hoped wouldn't materialize but knew probably would. And Elara sat in Martha's room staring at a map of the territory, trying to think like Gerald Voss. He'll want to contain this, she said aloud, tracing routes with her finger. Keep it local, handle it quietly. The last thing he needs is territorial or federal attention, so he'll use Sheriff Hutchins to make it look legal, frame us for theft, maybe murder if they're feeling ambitious, get warrants, make it official enough that no one asks too many questions. What about Calder? Martha asked. He doesn't strike me as the patient type. Calder's the weapon, but Gerald's the hand holding it. If we can predict Gerald's strategy, we can stay ahead of both of them. Elara circled a spot on the map, the crossroads town of Mesquite, 30 miles north. This is where the freighter would stop on his way to Santa Fe, right? Right. He usually camps there overnight, trades with the local store. Then that's where they'll try to intercept him. Gerald's not stupid. He'll have people watching the roads out of Red Hollow, looking for anyone carrying packages or moving with purpose. She looked up at Martha. We need a distraction, something big enough to pull their attention away from the real escape route. What did you have in mind? Elara's smile was cold. We give them what they want, or at least make them think we're giving it to them. By the time Rose returned, her face carefully blank but her hands clenched white around her reticule, Fletcher had finished the copies. 2 complete sets of documents, each one damning enough to end the Voss empire if it reached the right eyes. I got the money, Rose said without preamble, dropping a heavy coin purse on the table. Enough for the freighter and then some. What did it cost you? Clara asked gently. Nothing I haven't paid before. Nothing I won't survive. Rose poured herself a whiskey with shaking hands. The buyer wants us gone from Red Hollow within 48 hours. Says if we're still here when the Vosses realize what we've done, he doesn't want to be associated with us. Can't blame him. We'll be gone, Martha assured her. One way or another. Fletcher divided the documents into 2 leather satchels. This set goes to the freighter for the governor's office. This one we keep as insurance. If anything happens to the first set, if it gets intercepted or destroyed, we still have ammunition. And if we get killed, Edwin asked bluntly, if they catch us before we can use it? Then we make sure someone else can. Elara took one of the satchels, hefting its weight. Martha, you said you knew people in Denver. People who'd publish this if something happened to us? I did. Still do, assuming they're alive and still in the newspaper business. Write them a letter, explain everything. Tell them if they don't hear from us within 2 weeks, they should assume we're dead and publish everything. Elara's voice was steady, though her heart hammered with the enormity of what she was suggesting. Make it a dead man's switch. We die. The truth comes out anyway. That's cold, Edwin said, something like admiration in his voice. That's survival. Martha was already reaching for paper and pen. I'll write it tonight, get it sent tomorrow through channels the Vosses don't watch. By the time they realize what we've done, it'll be too late to stop it. The trap was set. Now they just had to survive long enough to spring it. Darkness fell over Red Hollow like a curtain, and with it came the sound Elara had been dreading. Horses, moving in formation, converging on the boarding house from multiple directions. She watched from her window as Sheriff Hutchins arrived, with at least a dozen deputies, more men than the town's law enforcement usually employed, which meant Gerald Voss had hired additional guns and given them badges to make it look legitimate. Martha Cole, Hutchins' voice boomed through the evening air. Open this door in the name of the law. Martha descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, making them wait. Elara and the others watched from the upper floor, hands on weapons, ready to fight if it came to that, but hoping it wouldn't. The door opened. Hutchins stood there with a paper in his hand. Official looking, probably real. I have a warrant for the arrest of one Elara Quinn on charges of theft, assault, and attempted murder. Witnesses saw a woman matching her description fleeing the scene of a robbery at the Voss building last night. Is that so? Martha's voice dripped skepticism. And what witnesses would those be? The ones Mr. Voss pays or the ones he threatens? Don't get smart with me, old woman. Either produce Miss Quinn immediately, or I'll arrest you for harboring a fugitive. On what grounds? You have a warrant for one person, not for searching my entire house. I have probable cause to believe she's hiding here. That's grounds enough. Hutchins gestured to his deputies. Search the building. Every room, every closet. And if any of these women give you trouble, arrest them too. The deputies poured in like locusts, their boots thundering on the floorboards. But Elara was already moving, following the escape route they'd planned for exactly this scenario. Through Clara's room to the back window, onto the roof overhang, down the trellis to the alley below. She landed in a crouch, pistol drawn, heart pounding. Edwin was waiting with 2 horses, their hooves wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. Fletcher's already gone with the first document set. Gave it to the freighter an hour ago. Our job's to lead them away from him. Where? North toward the canyon country. Martha figured if they're chasing us, they're not watching the Santa Fe road. He swung into his saddle. Can you ride? I'm about to learn. Elara mounted awkwardly, grateful for the horse's patience. She'd ridden before, but never at night, never running for her life. Behind them, shouts erupted from the boarding house. Someone had discovered her empty room. There! In the alley. Ride! Edwin kicked his horse into motion, and Elara followed, clinging to the saddle as they thundered through Red Hollow's back streets. Gunfire cracked behind them, wild shots in the darkness, more meant to intimidate than hit. But bullets didn't care about intent, and Elara heard one whine past her ear, close enough to make her flinch. They burst out of town onto the desert trail, the night swallowing them in blessed darkness. Behind them, the pursuit organized itself. More horses, more guns. The entire machinery of the Voss Empire mobilized to hunt them down. Edwin led them off the main trail onto a narrow path that twisted through rock formations and dry washes, terrain that would slow their pursuers, but could break a horse's leg if you weren't careful. The moon was a sliver, barely enough light to see by, and Elara found herself trusting her mount's instincts more than her own vision. How long can we stay ahead of them? She called to Edwin. If we're lucky, till dawn. If we're not... He didn't finish the sentence. They rode for hours through landscape that seemed designed to kill travelers, sharp rocks that could shred hooves, gullies that appeared without warning, patches of loose sand that grabbed at the horse's legs. Elara's thighs burned, her hands cramped on the reins, but she didn't dare slow down. Behind them, the pursuit kept coming, inexorable as death. As the sky began to lighten from black to gray, Edwin guided them into a narrow canyon where red rock walls rose on either side like the throat of some enormous beast. "This is it," he said, dismounting. "This is where we make our stand." "What are you talking about? We need to keep running. On tired horses with armed men behind us? We'll be dead by noon." He was already pulling supplies from his saddlebag. Ammunition, water, a rifle Elara hadn't noticed he was carrying. "This canyon has one entrance and one exit. We hold them here, make them think twice about following us any further." "There's only 2 of us." "Then we'd better shoot straight." Edwin found a position behind a boulder with a clear view of the canyon entrance. "You said you learned to shoot." "Time to prove it." Elara took up a position on the opposite wall, her heart hammering with a mixture of fear and something else. Anticipation, maybe, or the cold satisfaction of finally being able to fight back instead of hiding. She checked her pistol, counted her bullets. 12 rounds. If it came down to it, she'd make every one count. The first riders appeared as the sun crested the horizon. 3 men on horseback, moving cautiously now that they'd reached the canyon. Smart enough to suspect a trap, not smart enough to turn back. Edwin fired first. His bullet kicked up dust 3 feet in front of the lead rider's horse, a warning shot that made the animal rear and the man curse. "Far enough," Edwin called out. "You boys want to keep coming, we'll be happy to accommodate. But some of you won't be riding back." The riders conferred in low voices. Elara could see more men gathering behind them, at least a dozen, maybe more. They were outnumbered 6 to 1, maybe worse. But numbers didn't matter as much in a bottleneck. The canyon walls would force their pursuers to come at them in pairs at most. "We don't want trouble," one of the riders called back, a lie so obvious even he didn't seem to believe it. "Just return what you stole and nobody gets hurt." "What we took was evidence of murder, fraud, and corruption," Elara shouted, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "And it's already on its way to people who can't be bought. You can kill us, but it won't change what's coming for the Voss family." A different voice responded, colder and more familiar. "Then I guess there's no reason to leave you alive." Calder Voss rode forward through the line of hired guns, his pale eyes gleaming with something that might have been excitement. He looked at Elara across 50 yards of open ground, and she saw recognition dawn on his face, even through the dust and distance. "You," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "You're the Quinn girl, the one who died in the fire." "The one you tried to kill," Elara corrected, her hand steady on her pistol, despite the rage burning through her veins. "The one you left for dead after murdering her family." Calder laughed, actually laughed, as if this was all some grand joke. "I'll admit I'm impressed. Most people who cross my family end up dead or running. You've done both, and somehow you're still breathing. That takes either courage or stupidity." "Maybe both." Elara raised her pistol, sighting down the barrel at that cruel, smiling face. "But I'm done running, and you're done killing with impunity." "Am I?" Calder gestured at the men behind him. "I have a dozen guns. You have 2. The math isn't in your favor, sweetheart. The math changes when one of those guns is pointed at your heart." Elara's finger tightened on the trigger. "Come on, Calder. Let's see if you're as brave when you're the target instead of the shooter." For a moment, something flickered in Calder's eyes. Not fear exactly, but calculation. He was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that this wasn't some random robbery or personal vendetta that could be solved with money or violence. This was something new, something dangerous, consequence. "Kill them both," he ordered, pulling his horse back behind the line. "I want their bodies brought back for identification." The hired guns opened fire. Elara threw herself behind cover as bullets ricocheted off the canyon walls, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. She returned fire blindly, more to keep them back than with any hope of hitting anything. Beside her, Edwin's rifle cracked methodically. He was a better shot than her, and he wasn't wasting bullets on intimidation. One of the hired guns fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Another's horse spooked and bolted back the way they'd come. The rest dismounted, realizing this was going to be a siege rather than a quick execution. "We can't hold them forever," Elara called to Edwin during a lull in the shooting. "Don't need forever, just need to hold them long enough for Fletcher to get far enough ahead that even if they catch us, they can't catch him." "And how long is that?" "Couple more hours, maybe." Edwin ejected spent shells and reloaded with practiced efficiency. "After that, we can try to slip away in the confusion." "What confusion?" As if in answer, a new sound echoed through the canyon, More horses, coming fast from the opposite direction. For a horrible moment, Elara thought it was reinforcements for the Voss men, that they'd been flanked and were now trapped completely. But the riders that appeared at the canyon's far end weren't wearing deputy badges or Voss colors. They were townspeople, a dozen or more, men and women both, some armed with rifles, others with nothing but determination and righteous anger. Leading them, impossibly, was Martha Cole, sitting astride a horse with a Winchester across her saddle and murder in her eyes. "About time you boys picked on someone your own size," she shouted, and opened fire on the Voss men from behind. The hired guns found themselves caught between two forces, and the careful courage that money bought evaporated in an instant. They broke, some trying to fight their way out the front, others attempting to retreat past Martha's impromptu militia. It was chaos. Horses screaming, men cursing, bullets flying in every direction as the canyon became a killing ground. Elara saw Calder Voss in the middle of it all, his face twisted with rage and disbelief as his hired army dissolved around him. Their eyes met across the carnage, and she saw him make a decision. He spurred his horse toward her, drawing his pistol, apparently deciding that if he was going to lose today, he'd at least take her with him. She stepped into the open, raised her gun, and fired. The bullet caught his horse in the chest. The animal went down in a tangle of legs and screaming, throwing Calder clear. He landed hard, the wind knocked out of him, his gun spinning away across the rocky ground. Elara walked toward him, her pistol never wavering. Around them, the fight was ending. Most of the hired guns either dead, wounded, or fled. Martha's people were securing prisoners, binding hands with practiced efficiency born of frontier justice. Calder Voss looked up at her from the dust, and for the first time she saw something like fear in those pale eyes. "You won't kill me," he said, trying for bravado and achieving only desperation. "You're not a killer." "You're right," Elara said quietly. "I'm not, but I am a survivor. And I know the difference." She pulled the silver spur from her pocket, his spur, engraved with his initials, torn from his boot the night he murdered her family. She tossed it down so it landed on his chest. "That's yours, I believe. Evidence. When they try you for murder, and they will try you, Calder, because we're going to make sure of it, that spur will be Exhibit A, along with testimony, documents, and a town full of people who are finally done being afraid of your family." She stepped back and let Martha's people drag him to his feet, binding his hands with rope that cut into his wrists. He was shouting something, threats, probably, or promises of revenge from his father, but Elara wasn't listening anymore. The fight was over. They'd survived, and for the first time since that terrible September night, she felt something other than rage and grief. She felt hope. The ride back to Red Hollow took most of the day, their group swollen now with prisoners and wounded men who'd learned the hard way that the town wasn't as helpless as it had pretended to be. Martha rode beside Elara, and eventually the question that had been burning in her came out. "How did you know to come? How did you find us?" Martha's smile was grim. "After Hutchins searched the boarding house and came up empty, I figured you'd done exactly what we'd planned, ran north to draw them off Fletcher's trail. But I also figured you'd need help once they caught up. So I did what you did. I made myself dangerous enough that people had to listen." "What does that mean?" "It means I called a town meeting, right there in the square with Hutchins watching. And I told everyone, Elara, what the Voss family had done. Not just to you, but to all of us. Every family they'd cheated, every person they'd hurt, every life they'd destroyed. I laid it all out where everyone could hear." "And they believed you?" "Some did, some didn't. But enough were angry enough, tired enough, scared enough of what would happen if we didn't act that they decided to do something about it. We're not an army, but we're not victims anymore either." Martha's voice hardened. "The Vosses built their power on our silence. Well, we're not silent anymore." They crested a ridge and Red Hollow came into view below, the town that had been her prison and her proving ground, where she'd lost everything and found something harder and stronger in its place. Smoke rose from chimneys, life continuing as it always had. But Elara knew that something fundamental had shifted. The town had remembered how to fight back. As they rode down the main street, people emerged from buildings to stare. Some cheered. Others looked terrified, as if they couldn't quite believe what was happening. And a few, the ones who'd benefited most from Voss patronage, watched with cold calculation, already planning their next moves. Sheriff Hutchins stood in front of his office, his face pale as he saw Calder Voss bound and being led like a common criminal through the town he'd terrorized. "You can't do this," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "He's been accused, not convicted. You need to release him to my custody." "Your custody?" Martha's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You mean the custody of the man who takes Voss money to look the other way?" "I don't think so, Sheriff." "This is kidnapping. Vigilante justice. I'll have you all arrested." "Go ahead." Elara dismounted, standing before Hutchins with her head high. "Arrest us. Arrest all of us. And while you're at it, explain to the territorial governor why you're protecting a man who murdered my family, forged land deeds, bribed half the county officials, and ran this town like his personal kingdom. Because those documents, they're already on their way to Santa Fe, and they name names, Sheriff, including yours." Hutchins went gray. "I was just doing my job. Your job was to protect people. Instead, you protected monsters." Elara felt no satisfaction in his fear, only a cold sense of completion. "Now step aside. We're taking Calder Voss to a cell where he'll wait for real law enforcement to arrive, the kind that can't be bought." For a moment, she thought Hutchins might resist, might call on his deputies to stop them. But the deputies were looking at each other with uncertain expressions, clearly weighing their loyalty to a sinking ship against their desire to survive what came next. Hutchins stepped aside. They locked Calder Voss in the town jail, in the same cell where his father's money had probably freed a dozen guilty men before. He screamed threats and promises the entire time, but his voice sounded smaller now, diminished by bars and the knowledge that for the first time in his life, his family name couldn't save him. Elara stood outside the cell, watching him pace like a caged animal. "I want you to understand something," she said quietly. "You took everything from me. My family, my home, my innocence. You thought you could kill us all and walk away without consequences." "I still can," Calder snarled, though his bravado was cracking. "My father will have you skinned alive for this. He'll burn down this entire town. Let him try." Elara's voice was ice. "Because while you're sitting in this cell, while your father's scrambling to contain the damage, those documents are reaching people who actually care about justice. Your empire is falling, Calder, and you're going to watch it happen from behind these bars." She walked away from his screaming, feeling lighter than she had in months. It wasn't over, not by a long stretch. Gerald Voss was still out there, still dangerous, still capable of enormous destruction in his death throes. But they'd taken his heir, his weapon, his illusion of untouchability. They'd proven the Voss family could bleed. That night, the boarding house became something it had never been before, a war room. People crowded into the kitchen and parlor, former Voss employees with stories to tell, families who'd been cheated with deeds to prove it, witnesses who'd seen crimes but been too afraid to speak until now. Fletcher spread the remaining documents across every available surface, organizing testimony with the precision of a lawyer building a case. "We need to move fast," he said, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Gerald Voss is in the territorial capital, but he'll have heard what happened by now. He'll be on his way back with lawyers, with more hired guns, with every resource he can muster to crush this before it spreads." "Then we make sure it spreads faster than he can move," Martha said. "How many riders do we have who can reach surrounding towns by morning?" A quick count revealed 7, not many, but maybe enough. They drafted messages describing what had happened, what evidence existed, calling on neighboring communities to stand with Red Hollow against the Voss Empire. It was a gamble, asking other towns to risk themselves for a fight that wasn't directly theirs. But oppression was like wildfire. Let it burn unchecked in one place, and eventually it spread everywhere. Rose volunteered to ride to Silver Creek, the next town over. "I know people there. They'll listen to me." "You sure?" Claire asked. "You've already risked so much." "That's exactly why I have to keep going. If we stop now, if we let fear make us hesitate, then everything we've done gets wasted." Rose's smile was tired but genuine. "Besides, I'm not the scared girl who came to this boarding house anymore. None of us are." One by one, the riders departed into the darkness, carrying messages and hope, and the fragile possibility that this time, finally, the monster wouldn't win. Elara watched them go from the porch, Martha beside her. You started something here, Martha said quietly. Something bigger than revenge. I just wanted justice for my family. Justice for one becomes justice for all, if you're brave enough to share it. Martha's hand found Elara's shoulder. Your father would be proud. Your mother would be proud. You've become the kind of woman who doesn't just survive, she changes things. Elara felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't let them fall. There would be time for crying later when the fight was truly over. For now, there was only the work. Inside, people were still arriving. A farmer who'd lost his water rights to Voss manipulation. A widow whose husband had accidentally died after refusing to sell his land. A young woman whose sister had disappeared after rejecting Calder's advances. Each had a story, and each story was another nail in the Voss family coffin. Edwin found her as the night deepened into early morning. I've been thinking about Gerald, he said. He's not going to come back with just lawyers. He's going to come back ready for war. We need to be ready too. Ready how? Fortifications, defensive positions, a way to hold the town if he tries to take it by force. Edwin's scarred hand sketched in the air. We control the jail where his son is. That gives us leverage, but only if we can defend it. You really think he'd assault the town? I think a man watching his empire collapse will do things a sane man wouldn't consider. Yes, I think he'd burn Red Hollow to the ground if he thought it would save his legacy. Elara looked at the people crowded into the boarding house, ordinary folk who'd found extraordinary courage, who decided that being afraid forever was worse than being brave for a day. They deserved protection. They deserved a fighting chance. Then we give it to him, she decided. Tomorrow, we start preparing. Barricades, weapon distribution, organized watches. If Gerald Voss wants a war, we'll give him one he won't forget. Martha overheard and nodded grimly. I'll coordinate with the militia. We've got more volunteers than I expected. Turns out a lot of people have been waiting for someone to stand up first so they could follow. The work continued through the night. By the time dawn broke, pale and thin, as if even the sun was nervous about what the day would bring, Red Hollow had transformed from a town under occupation into something else, a community preparing to defend itself. Barricades went up at key intersections. Sharpshooters took positions on rooftops. The jail was reinforced with whatever materials could be found: furniture, sandbags, heavy doors from abandoned buildings. It wouldn't stop a determined assault, but it would slow one down, and sometimes time was the most valuable weapon. Elara found herself moving through it all in a kind of trance, giving orders, organizing people, becoming a leader without quite meaning to. People looked to her for direction, and somehow she found the words they needed, the confidence they craved. Around noon, a rider arrived from the north, not one of theirs, but a stranger on a lathered horse who skidded to a stop in the town square. Message from Silver Creek, he gasped, accepting water from a bystander. Rose made it through. The town council voted to support you. They're sending 20 armed men to help with the defense. A cheer went up from the gathered crowd. 20 wasn't an army, but it was a statement. Red Hollow wasn't alone anymore. More messages trickled in through the day, some towns pledging support, others offering neutrality, a few warning that Gerald Voss had indeed left the territorial capital and was riding hard for Red Hollow with what looked like a small army of hired guns and corrupt officials willing to stamp their approval on whatever violence he deemed necessary. As the sun began to set on what might be their last peaceful night, Elara stood in the jail looking at Calder Voss through the bars. He'd stopped screaming hours ago, had descended into a sullen silence broken only by occasional muttered curses. Your father's coming, she told him. Probably planning to break you out, kill everyone involved, and bury this whole thing like it never happened. Calder's smile was ugly. Then you're all dead. My father doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. You think you've won? You've just guaranteed your own massacre. Maybe. Elara pulled up a chair and sat, never taking her eyes off him. Or maybe your father's about to learn what his son learned, that there's a difference between being feared and being powerful. Fear only works when people are isolated, when they think they're alone. But we're not alone anymore. We're an army of the people your family destroyed, and we're done being afraid. Noble speech, won't stop bullets. No, but it'll make sure that if we fall, others rise to take our place. That's the thing about oppression, Calder. Push people down long enough, and eventually they don't just resist, they explode. She stood, preparing to leave. Sleep well. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She left him in the darkness, his pale eyes following her with impotent rage. Outside, Red Hollow was preparing for war, and she had a town to help save. The night passed in tense vigilance, guards walking their rounds, volunteers catching what sleep they could, everyone waiting for the storm they knew was coming. Elara didn't sleep. She stood watch on the roof of the boarding house, Martha beside her, both of them scanning the horizon for signs of approaching doom. "You afraid?" Martha asked as the sky began to lighten. "Terrified," Elara admitted. "But fear doesn't matter anymore. Only what we do with it." "That's a soldier's answer." "Maybe I am a soldier now. Maybe we all are." Elara thought of her father teaching her to hammer nails, her mother singing while she cooked, Thomas collecting bird feathers. "They made me this. The Vosses. When they killed my family, they thought they were eliminating a problem. Instead, they created one." "Good," Martha said simply. "The world needs more problems like you." As dawn broke over Red Hollow, red and violent as the day promised to be, a lookout called down from the church steeple. "Riders, coming from the south, at least 40, maybe more." Gerald Voss had arrived, and with him, the reckoning they'd all been waiting for. The dust cloud rose on the southern horizon like a biblical plague, 40 riders moving in formation with the precision of men who'd been promised good money and told not to ask questions. Elara watched them approach from her position on the boarding house roof, her hands steady on the rifle Martha had pressed into her arms an hour before dawn. "That's Gerald Voss in the lead," Edwin said from beside her, squinting through a spyglass. "I'd recognize that black stallion anywhere. And those men flanking him, those aren't local deputies. Those are territorial marshals, or at least men wearing marshal badges." "He bought himself legitimacy," Martha observed grimly. "Smart. Now whatever he does here can be called law enforcement instead of murder." The riders stopped at the edge of town, just beyond rifle range, and a single man rode forward carrying a white flag. Not Gerald Voss himself, he was too smart to expose himself, but a younger man in an expensive suit who looked like a lawyer trying very hard to appear brave. "That's Connor Pierce, Fletcher said, recognition in his voice. "Gerald's personal attorney. Whatever he's about to say, it'll be carefully worded to sound legal while meaning something else entirely." They descended from the roof and made their way to the town square, where a crowd had already gathered, armed civilians mixing with the reinforcements from Silver Creek, forming a ragged defensive line that looked more determined than organized. Pierce waited in the center of the square, his white flag drooping in the still morning air, sweat already darkening his collar despite the cool temperature. Martha stepped forward as their spokesperson, Elara at her side. "State your business." Pierce cleared his throat, pulling a document from his jacket with hands that trembled slightly. "I represent Gerald Voss, acting in his capacity as a concerned father and as a deputized agent of the territorial governor. I am authorized to inform you that the town of Red Hollow is currently in violation of territorial law. You are illegally detaining Calder Voss without proper arrest procedures, you have assaulted duly appointed peace officers, and you have stolen property belonging to private citizens." "That property was evidence of crimes," Martha shot back. "And the only thing illegal here is the empire Gerald Voss built on fraud and murder. Your accusations are noted and will be investigated through proper channels." Pierce's voice gained confidence as he moved through his rehearsed speech. "However, the immediate matter is this. You will release Calder Voss into our custody within the hour, or Mr. Voss has been authorized to use whatever force necessary to secure his son's release. This is not a negotiation. This is a legal order backed by territorial authority." Sweat. "Territorial authority bought and paid for," Elara said, stepping forward. "Tell Gerald Voss that his son stays in that cell until real law enforcement arrives, the kind that can't be bribed or threatened. And if he wants to try taking him by force, he's welcome to try. But he should know that we've sent complete documentation of his crimes to the territorial capital, to newspapers in 3 states, and to federal authorities. His son is just the beginning. We're coming for the whole empire." Pierce's face paled. "You're threatening a territorial official. I'm promising a murderer that justice is coming." Elara's voice carried across the square, and she saw people straightening, drawing courage from her certainty. Your client killed my family. He killed others. He's hidden behind money and corruption for his entire life. But that ends today. Tell him that if he wants his son back, he'll have to go through all of us. The lawyer looked between Elara's set face and the armed crowd behind her, clearly doing calculations about his own survival. I'll relay your message, but you're making a terrible mistake. Mr. Voss is not a man who accepts defiance. Then he's about to learn. Martha gestured toward the edge of town. You have your answer. Now leave before we decide that messenger immunity doesn't apply to men carrying threats. Pierce fled, his horse kicking up dust as he galloped back to the waiting army. They watched him deliver his report to Gerald Voss, saw the distant figure stiffen with rage, saw him turn to his men and begin issuing orders. They're not leaving, Edwin observed unnecessarily. They're preparing to attack. Let them come. Martha's voice was steel. Everyone to positions. This is what we prepared for. The defenders of Red Hollow scattered to their assigned posts, rooftops, barricades, reinforced buildings with clear firing lanes. Elara found herself assigned to the jail itself, the building they absolutely couldn't lose. If Gerald's men broke through and freed Calder, their entire leverage disappeared. The jail had to hold. Inside, Calder Voss pressed against the bars of his cell, his face alight with vicious triumph. You hear that? My father's coming. And when he's done with you people, there won't be enough left to bury. Your faith in him is touching, Elara said, checking her ammunition. Hope it keeps you warm when you're both in prison. The attack began with surprising subtlety. Gerald's force didn't charge in all at once like bandits. They moved with military precision, small groups advancing under covering fire, while others maneuvered to flank the town's defenses. Someone had trained these men, or Gerald had hired former soldiers willing to work for the right price. The first shots rang out as Gerald's advance scouts tested the barricades on Main Street. Defenders returned fire from protected positions, and the morning air filled with the sharp crack of rifles and the smell of gunpowder. Elara watched through a reinforced window as men in martial uniforms used the badge as both shield and weapon, calling for surrender while bullets flew. Hold your fire unless they breach the outer perimeter, Martha's voice carried from somewhere outside. Make every shot count. The battle settled into an ugly rhythm, advance and repulse, attack and defend, neither side gaining clear advantage. Gerald's men had numbers and better weapons, but Red Hollow's defenders had desperation and the advantage of defensive positions. Hours crawled past like days, the sun climbing higher, heat building inside the jail until the air felt thick enough to choke on. Around noon, a massive explosion rocked the eastern barricade. Someone on Gerald's side had brought dynamite, probably mining explosives from one of the Voss-owned operations. The blast tore through the barrier like paper, creating a gap large enough for a cavalry charge. They're coming through! The shout went up from multiple defenders. East side breach. Elara watched through the jail window as Gerald's men poured through the gap, firing as they came. The defenders fell back in ragged order, some wounded, some dead, others simply overwhelmed by the sudden violence. This was it. The moment their makeshift defense would either hold or shatter completely. Martha appeared in the jail doorway, her face blackened with powder smoke, blood streaking her arm from a graze she either hadn't noticed or didn't care about. We can't hold the whole town. We're pulling back to secondary positions, concentrating our force around the jail and the boarding house. If we lose everything else but keep Calder, we still have leverage. How many casualties? Too many to count right now. Clara's set up a field hospital in the church basement. Fletcher's organizing ammunition distribution. Rose, Martha's voice caught. Rose took a bullet covering the retreat from the east barricade. She's alive, but it's bad. The guilt hit Elara like a physical blow. Rose, who'd already sacrificed so much, who'd faced down her own demons to help this fight, now bleeding because Elara had started something she couldn't finish. I need to see her. You need to stay here and guard the prisoner. That's what matters now. Martha's grip on Elara's shoulder was iron. Rose knew the risks. We all did. Don't let her sacrifice be for nothing. The consolidated defense line formed a rough perimeter around the jail and boarding house, connected by barricades and defended positions that created interlocking fields of fire. It was a smaller area to defend, which helped, but it also meant they were being compressed, pushed back, losing ground with every hour. Gerald Voss himself finally made an appearance in mid-afternoon, riding forward with Pierce and several heavily armed guards. He was a tall man, perhaps 60 years old, with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that looked carved from granite, handsome in a brutal way, with eyes that assessed everything in terms of profit and loss. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been refused anything important in his entire life. "This has gone on long enough," he announced, as if the battle was an inconvenience rather than a war. "I'm prepared to offer terms. Release my son, turn over any documents you've stolen, and I'll guarantee safe passage out of Red Hollow for the ringleaders. Everyone else can stay with no repercussions." "Your guarantees aren't worth the breath it takes to speak them," someone shouted from the barricades. Gerald's expression hardened. "Then let me put it differently. You're surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. You have perhaps a day's worth of ammunition left, maybe less. Meanwhile, I can send for reinforcements from 3 counties. This is a fight you cannot win. Surrender now with some dignity, or I'll bury every person in this town and tell the territorial governor you were insurgents who forced my hand." "You'd murder an entire town." Elara stepped into view, her voice ringing clear. "Even for you, that's ambitious." Gerald's eyes found her, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Ah, the Quinn girl. I heard you'd survived Calder's work. Unfortunate oversight on his part. But I'm a practical man, Miss Quinn. I understand vengeance. I even respect it. So here's my offer to you specifically. Take your evidence, take whatever money you need to start over somewhere else, and leave. Just you. In exchange, I'll ensure your friends here are treated leniently. You have my word." "Your word," Elara laughed, bitter and sharp. "The same word you gave my father when he worked your land? The same word you've given to every person you've cheated and destroyed? I'd sooner trust a rattlesnake." "Then you'll die with the rest of them." Gerald turned his horse, preparing to ride back to his lines. "Such a waste. You could have been smart about this." "One more thing," Elara called out, stopping him. "While you've been busy attacking this town, those documents we stole, they're already in Santa Fe. They're being reviewed by territorial auditors who can't be bought because we specifically sought out the ones your money hasn't touched. Your empire is over, Gerald. Whether you kill us or not, whether you get your son back or not, it's already over. We've made sure of that." For the first time, Gerald Voss looked uncertain. "You're lying." "Am I? Tell me, when's the last time someone from the governor's office contacted you? When's the last time your usual channels responded to your messages?" Elara let the question hang. "It's already started, Gerald. The audit, the investigation, the unraveling. This town is just the public face of your private collapse." Gerald stared at her for a long moment, and she saw murder in his eyes, pure, undiluted hatred for the girl who dared to survive and strike back. Then he spurred his horse and rode back to his lines without another word. "Was that true?" Martha asked quietly once he was gone. "About the auditors?" "Some of it. Fletcher did send documents to contacts in the territorial government. Whether they've acted on them yet," Elara shrugged. "But Gerald doesn't know that. And doubt is its own weapon." The afternoon wore on into evening with sporadic exchanges of gunfire, but no major assault. Gerald was regrouping, Elara realized, probably sending for those reinforcements he'd mentioned. The temporary reprieve gave Red Hollow's defenders time to tend their wounded, redistribute ammunition, and shore up their defenses, but everyone knew it was just delaying the inevitable. Elara made her way to the church basement where Clara had set up her makeshift hospital. The scene was worse than she'd imagined. At least 20 wounded packed into a space meant for hymn practice, the air thick with the copper smell of blood and the sharper tang of carbolic acid. Clara moved between patients with desperate efficiency, her dress soaked through with other people's blood, her face a mask of concentration that couldn't quite hide her exhaustion. Rose lay on a pallet in the corner, her skin wax pale, a bandage around her chest already seeping red. Her eyes flickered open when Elara knelt beside her. "Hey," Rose whispered, managing a weak smile. "Some party you threw." "I'm so sorry." Elara took her hand, feeling how cold it was. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. "Don't." Rose's grip tightened with surprising strength. Don't apologize for giving me something worth bleeding for. I spent years letting men hurt me for their pleasure. At least this time I chose the fight. Her breath caught, pain flickering across her face. Did we win? Not yet, but we will. Promise me something. Rose's eyes were intense despite her weakness. If I don't make it, you're going to make it. If I don't, Rose continued firmly, promise me you'll finish this. Not just for your family, but for all of us. Every woman in that boarding house, every person in this town who finally found the courage to stand up. We need you to see this through. Elara felt tears burning, but refused to let them fall. I promise. Good. Rose's eyes drifted closed. Now get back to work. Can't win a war from a hospital basement. Clara caught Elara on her way out, pulling her aside with blood-slicked hands. She's not going to make it through the night, she said bluntly. The bullet hit something vital, liver maybe, or an artery I can't reach. I've done everything I can, but without a real surgeon, real equipment. She trailed off, helpless rage in her eyes. How many others? 3 dead for certain. 5 more who might not see morning, and that's just our side. I haven't counted Gerald's casualties, but they're carrying bodies out of town every few hours. Clara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Elara, we can't sustain this. Even if we hold them off today, tomorrow, the day after, eventually we'll run out of bullets or people or luck. We need a way out that doesn't end with everyone dead. I know. But Elara didn't know, not really. She'd started this fight with revenge in her heart and righteousness on her side. But she was learning that those things didn't stop bullets or heal wounds. War didn't care about justice. She made her way back to the jail as darkness fell, finding Edwin standing guard with a rifle across his knees and exhaustion written in every line of his body. They're planning something, he said without preamble. Gerald pulled most of his men back to the south end of town. Either they're giving up, which seems unlikely, or they're preparing for a major assault. Under cover of darkness. That'd be my guess. Hit us when we're tired, when visibility is poor, when our defensive advantage shrinks. Edwin checked his ammunition, frowning. We've got maybe 200 rounds left total, spread across 40 defenders. That's 5 bullets per person if we're lucky. Then we make them count. Elara moved to the window, staring out at Red Hollow's darkened streets. Somewhere out there, Gerald Voss was planning their deaths with the same cold calculation he'd probably used to plan business acquisitions. To him, this was just another problem to solve, another obstacle to eliminate. But that was his weakness, she realized. Gerald saw people as assets or liabilities, never as human beings capable of unexpected action. He thought like a businessman, which meant he followed patterns, predictable patterns, and patterns could be exploited. What if we don't wait for his assault? She said slowly, an idea forming. What if we hit him first? Edwin looked at her like she'd gone mad. With 40 exhausted defenders against his remaining force? That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only move he won't see coming. Elara's mind was racing now, possibilities cascading. He's expecting us to hunker down, to defend, to wait for him to overwhelm us. What if instead we take the fight to him? A raid fast and brutal, targeting his command structure. If we can take out Gerald himself, the whole operation falls apart, Edwin finished, understanding dawning. Without him, those hired guns have no reason to keep fighting. They'll scatter, take what pay they've earned, and run. Exactly. We don't need to win a siege, we just need to cut off the head. Elara turned to face him fully. Can you organize it? Maybe a dozen fighters, the best we have? People willing to take the risk? I can try. But Elara, if this fails, if we lose those dozen people, we lose everything. The jail won't hold, the defense collapses, it's over. If we don't try, it's over anyway. At least this way we die attacking instead of waiting. She managed a grim smile. Besides, Gerald Voss took everything from me once. I won't let him do it again. The raid team assembled in the jail's back room an hour before midnight, 13 volunteers, though Martha had wanted to make it 14 and Elara had refused to let her come. You're needed here, she'd insisted. If we fail, someone has to organize the retreat, get people out alive. That's you. But Martha had argued naturally, but eventually conceded with a warning. "You die out there. I'll never forgive you." "I'll keep that in mind." Edwin had mapped out Gerald's position based on scout reports. The Voss building, naturally, converted into a temporary headquarters with guards on all approaches, and his remaining force camped in the surrounding streets. The plan was brutally simple. Infiltrate using the same back alleys Elara had learned during her months of surveillance, reach the building, fight their way to Gerald, and either capture or kill him before his guards could respond. Simple, but simple didn't mean easy. They moved out at midnight, 13 shadows drifting through Red Hollow's dark streets, weapons held ready, every sense straining for signs of sentries or patrols. The town felt like a graveyard, buildings dark and silent, the normal sounds of frontier life replaced by an oppressive quiet, broken only by distant voices from Gerald's camp. Twice they nearly walked into patrol routes, saved only by Edwin's sharp ears catching the sound of boots on gravel. Once they had to hide while a pair of Gerald's men passed within 3 feet, close enough that Elara could smell their tobacco smoke and hear their muttered complaints about the cold and the pay. The Voss building loomed ahead, lamplight spilling from second-floor windows where Gerald presumably held court. 4 guards stood at the main entrance, alert but not expecting trouble from inside the town they thought they'd cowed. The back entrance, the same one Elara had used what felt like a lifetime ago, was less guarded, only 2 men who looked more bored than vigilant. Edwin made a gesture, and 2 of the raiders peeled off, circling to take the back guards silently. Elara counted heartbeats, 10, 15, 20, then saw the brief flash of movement that meant it was done. The back entrance stood open, inviting them into the belly of the beast they'd come to kill. Inside, the building was different than Elara remembered. Furniture moved aside to make room for maps and supply crates. Empty whiskey bottles, evidence of men trying to forget what they'd been paid to do. The smell of gun oil and unwashed bodies thick in the air. They climbed the back stairs in single file, every creak making her heart skip, certain that at any moment someone would raise an alarm. The second floor was where Gerald had set up his command center, judging by the voices drifting from the corner office. His office. The one they'd robbed weeks ago that felt like years. Guards stood outside the door, 3 of them, armed with rifles, and the kind of alert posture that said they took this duty seriously, no way past them quietly, which meant loud it was. Edwin counted down on his fingers, 3, 2, 1, and they opened fire. The guards went down in the first seconds, surprise and overwhelming force giving the raiders the advantage. But gunfire in an enclosed building was like ringing a bell. Everyone heard it. Everyone knew where it came from. Shouts erupted throughout the building, boots thundering as Gerald's men responded to the attack on their leader. "Move!" Edwin kicked open the office door and they poured inside, guns drawn, expecting resistance. Gerald Voss stood behind his desk with a pistol already in hand, his face a mask of cold rage. Pierce the lawyer cowered in the corner. 2 more guards flanked Gerald, their weapons tracking the raiders with deadly intent. For a frozen moment, nobody moved, everyone calculating odds and angles. "You're a fool," Gerald said, breaking the silence. "You've just trapped yourselves in a building full of my men. Surrendering now is your only chance." "We're not here to surrender," Elara said, her pistol aimed at his chest. "We're here to end this. You, specifically. Your empire is finished, your son's in jail, and you're about to join him. Dead or alive, your choice." "My choice?" Gerald's laugh was sharp. "You think I'm afraid of one girl with a gun? I've survived range wars, political purges, and economic collapses. I will survive you. You killed my family. I've killed lots of families. You'll need to be more specific." The casual admission, the sheer indifference to the lives he'd destroyed, made something snap inside Elara. She pulled the trigger. The bullet caught Gerald in the shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. He fired back reflexively, his shot going wild, and then everything descended into chaos. His guards opened fire, the raiders returned it, and the office became a killing ground of smoke and thunder and desperate violence. Elara dove behind an overturned desk as bullets chewed through the wood inches from her head. Someone screamed. One of their raiders hit, falling. Edwin was shouting orders, but she couldn't hear over the gunfire. She blind-fired around the desk's edge, more to suppress than to hit, then rolled to new cover as return fire tracked her position. The door burst open and more of Gerald's men poured in, reinforcements drawn by the firefight. The raiders were outnumbered now. caught in exactly the trap Gerald had predicted. This was how it ended, Elara realized with cold clarity, not in triumph, but in a desperate last stand in the office of the man she'd sworn to destroy. Then the windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Martha's voice, fierce and commanding. "Nobody kills these kids but me! Everyone down!" The boarding house women and men and half the remaining defenders of Red Hollow had followed the raid team despite orders, and now they poured covering fire through the shattered windows while others stormed up the stairs. Gerald's reinforcements found themselves caught between two forces, and the advantage they'd held evaporated in seconds. Elara used the confusion to rush Gerald's position, vaulting the desk and slamming into him before he could bring his weapon around. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Gerald's injured shoulder making him curse and weaken, but he fought with the desperate strength of a man who'd never lost anything important in his life and refused to start now. His hand found her throat, squeezing, and black spots danced in her vision. She clawed at his face, found his injured shoulder, and dug her fingers into the bullet wound. He screamed, and his grip loosened just enough for her to break free, gasping. "You should have died with your family," Gerald snarled, his face twisted with rage and pain. "Should have burned with them and saved everyone this trouble." "They deserved to live." Elara's hand found her fallen pistol. "And you deserve to face what you've done." She pulled the trigger, but the gun clicked empty, spent in the firefight, no bullets left. Gerald saw it in her eyes and laughed, reaching for his own weapon. This was it. The moment she died, and the only satisfaction she'd have was knowing she'd tried. The shot that saved her life came from the doorway. Martha, her face set and determined, her derringer smoking. The bullet took Gerald in the chest, center mass, and he looked down at the spreading red stain with something like surprise. "That's for every woman you ever hurt," Martha said quietly. "Every family you destroyed, every life you crushed under your greed." Gerald Voss collapsed, his hand reaching futilely toward his son's name on papers scattered across his desk, and then he was still. The fighting didn't stop immediately. There were still guards throughout the building, still hired guns who hadn't gotten the message. But with Gerald dead and the raiders reinforced by half the town's defenders, the outcome was no longer in doubt. One by one, Gerald's men surrendered or fled, pragmatism overcoming loyalty to a dead man's gold. By dawn, it was over. Elara stood in the street outside the Voss building as the sun rose, watching the captured guards being marched to makeshift holding cells, listening to the sounds of a town waking up to find itself free for the first time in decades. Her hands were shaking, from exhaustion, from the after effects of combat, from the realization that she was somehow still alive. Martha found her there, bloodied but unbowed, and wrapped her in a fierce embrace. "You damn fool! You beautiful, brave damn fool! When I said not to get yourself killed, I know, I tried." Elara pulled back, managing a weak smile. "How many did we lose?" Martha's expression sobered. 8 dead from our side, including 2 from the raid team. 15 wounded badly enough they might not make it. Gerald's forces took heavier casualties, maybe 20 dead, twice that wounded or captured. She paused. Rose didn't make it through the night. Clara said she went peacefully, asking if we'd won. The tears Elara had been holding back finally came, hot and bitter. Rose, who'd sacrificed everything for a chance at dignity, who'd found courage in her final days that most people never discovered in a lifetime, who'd believed in something bigger than survival. "Did we win?" Elara asked, her voice breaking. "It doesn't feel like winning. War never does. But we survived, and they didn't. Sometimes that's all winning means." Martha's hand found her shoulder, steadying. "Come on, there's still work to do." The work was endless and exhausting, securing prisoners, tending wounded, documenting what had happened for when real law enforcement finally arrived. Fletcher organized the captured documents, building an airtight case against not just the dead Gerald and imprisoned Calder, but everyone in their network of corruption. Edwin coordinated with the reinforcements from neighboring towns, ensuring Red Hollow stayed defended while they waited for territorial response. And Elara found herself in the jail, standing once again before Calder Voss's cell. He sat on the cot, with his head in his hands, all the arrogance burned out of him, leaving only a broken man who'd just lost everything. "Your father's dead," she told him flatly. "Your empire's dismantled. Your protection's gone. Soon, you'll face trial for murder, mine and others. They'll probably hang you. Calder looked up at her with hollow eyes. Then why bother telling me? Why not just shoot me now and save everyone the trouble? Because I want you to face what you did. I want you to stand in a courtroom and hear the families of your victims describe what you took from them. I want you to know, with certainty, that you're not special, not protected, not above consequence. Elara pulled the silver spur from her pocket, blood-stained now, like everything else, and held it up. This belonged to you. You lost it the night you murdered my family. I've carried it every day since as a reminder of what you took and what I swore to get back. Now it's evidence that'll help convict you. Funny how things work out. She turned to leave, but Calder's voice stopped her. Does it feel good? The revenge? Does it fix anything? Elara considered the question honestly. No, my family's still dead. The years I lost are gone. The innocence you destroyed won't come back. She looked at him one last time. But at least I can sleep knowing you'll never hurt anyone else. And that's not revenge. That's justice. She walked out of the jail into morning sunlight, leaving Calder Voss alone with his crimes and his father's corpse cooling in the undertaker's parlor. Red Hollow stretched before her, battered and bloodied, but standing, a town that had remembered how to fight for itself. The territorial marshals arrived 3 days later, real ones this time, sent by a governor who'd read the documents Fletcher had sent and realized his political survival depended on demonstrating swift action against corruption. They took custody of Calder Voss and the other prisoners, documented the Voss family's crimes with meticulous detail, and promised trials that would be public, thorough, and impossible to corrupt. You've done something remarkable here, the lead marshal told Elara as he prepared to transport the prisoners to the territorial capital. Taking on an empire like this, with no legal training, no official authority, people will tell stories about Red Hollow for decades. I didn't do it for stories. I did it because no one else would. That's usually how heroes are made. He tipped his hat. If you're ever interested in legal work, the territory could use more advocates like you. Elara almost laughed. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to die quietly. But as she watched the marshal's convoy depart, taking Calder Voss toward justice and Red Hollow toward something resembling peace, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. It wasn't over. There would be trials, testimony, the slow grinding work of dismantling the Voss corruption network completely, but the back of the beast was broken, and her family could rest knowing their deaths had been answered. That evening, the women of the boarding house gathered in the kitchen as they had so many times before, but this time the atmosphere was different, lighter, touched with cautious hope. Rose's empty chair was a wound that wouldn't heal quickly, but around it sat survivors who'd proven they were more than victims. Martha raised a glass of whiskey. To Rose, who found her courage when it mattered most. To everyone we lost. And to the future, which for the first time in a long time doesn't belong to men who bought it with blood money. They drank in silence, honoring the dead and celebrating the living in equal measure. And Elara Quinn, 19 years old and aged by fire, felt something she hadn't experienced since that terrible September night, the possibility of peace. Peace, Elara discovered, was harder to trust than war. At least in war, you knew where the enemy stood and what they wanted. Peace was murkier, filled with uncertainty and the nagging fear that any moment the violence would erupt again. The week following Gerald Voss's death brought an uneasy quiet to Red Hollow. The territorial marshals had taken the prisoners, yes, but they'd left behind questions that festered like infected wounds. What happened to the Voss properties? Who controlled the bank, the water rights, the vast tracts of land that had formed the empire's foundation? And most dangerously, who among Red Hollow's citizens had been complicit in the Voss regime and might seek revenge now that the family had fallen? Martha convened an emergency town meeting in the square, the first truly open gathering in memory where people didn't need to fear who was listening. Nearly 300 citizens showed up, their faces bearing the complicated mixture of hope and suspicion that came from years of oppression suddenly lifted. We need to talk about what comes next, Martha announced from the makeshift stage someone had constructed from wagon boards. The Vosses are gone, but the structures they built remain. We need to decide as a community how to move forward. "What's there to decide?" called out Marcus Webb, owner of the hardware store and a man everyone knew had profited handsomely from Voss contracts. "The territorial government will appoint administrators, handle the properties, and we'll all go back to our business." "Is that what you want?" Elara stepped forward, surprised at her own boldness but unable to stay silent. "To let outsiders decide our fate? To wait for new masters to replace the old ones?" Webb's face reddened. "You're mighty brave with your speeches now that you've got blood on your hands, Quinn girl. But some of us were running businesses while you were playing revolutionary. Some of you were profiting from corruption while others were dying," Elara shot back, her voice carrying across the crowd. "And yes, I have blood on my hands. The blood of the men who murdered my family, who terrorized this town, who built their wealth on suffering. If that makes me guilty, then I'll wear that guilt proudly." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, people dividing visibly into camps, those who'd actively resisted the Vosses, those who'd passively accepted their rule, and those who'd actively collaborated. The divisions that violence had temporarily obscured were surfacing now that immediate danger had passed. Fletcher stood, his voice cutting through the rising argument. "The question isn't who's guilty or innocent. We all made choices we're not proud of. The question is what kind of town we want to be moving forward. Do we want to replicate the same power structures with different names, or do we want to build something genuinely new?" "Pretty words," Webb sneered, "but this is the real world. Someone has to own the land, run the bank, manage the water. You can't run a town on revolution and righteousness." "Maybe not," Edwin spoke up from the back, his scarred hands visible as he gestured. "But you also can't build a future on the same foundation that just collapsed. The Voss land titles were fraudulent. Fletcher's documents prove that. The bank's loans were predatory, designed to trap people in debt. The water rights were stolen from public holdings. If we just hand all that over to whoever the government appoints, we're begging for the same abuse under a different name. So what's your solution?" This from Elizabeth Greaves, a widow who'd lost her farm to Voss machinations. "We tear everything down and start from nothing?" "We start from the truth," Elara said, finding her footing in this strange new kind of battle, one fought with words instead of bullets, but no less vital. "We return the stolen land to its rightful owners. We restructure the bank as a cooperative owned by depositors instead of a single family. We make the water rights public again, managed by elected officials instead of purchased ones. We take everything the Vosses built through corruption and transform it into something that serves everyone." The crowd erupted into a dozen simultaneous arguments. Some cheered Elara's vision, others called it naive fantasy. Still others warned darkly about the dangers of mob rule and hasty change. Martha let them argue for several minutes before firing her pistol into the air, the sharp crack silencing everyone. "We're not deciding everything today," she announced, "but we are going to form committees: land redistribution, bank restructuring, water management, public safety. Anyone who wants a voice in Red Hollow's future will have one. Anyone who wants to cling to the old ways is welcome to leave." "You can't exile people just for disagreeing with you," Webb protested. "I'm not exiling anyone. I'm giving you a choice. Help build something better, or get out of the way while others do." Martha's gaze swept the crowd. "The Voss era is over. What replaces it is up to all of us. But it will be fair, it will be transparent, and it will be built on truth. Anyone who can't accept that doesn't belong here." Over the following days, the committees formed and began their work. It was messier and more contentious than any battle Elara had fought. Endless debates over property boundaries, bitter arguments about who deserved compensation for past injustices, heated disagreements about how to structure new institutions. Democracy, she was learning, was chaos with rules, and those rules were constantly being tested. But it was working. Slowly, painfully, Red Hollow was transforming itself. The Land Committee, which Fletcher chaired with meticulous attention to documentation, began the process of identifying fraudulent Voss claims and returning property to families who'd been cheated. The Hernandez family got back their ranch that Gerald had stolen through forged signatures. The widow Greaves reclaimed her farm. A dozen other families found themselves suddenly owning land they'd thought lost forever. The bank restructuring proved more complicated. The institution held legitimate debts alongside predatory ones, and sorting them out required financial expertise nobody in Red Hollow possessed. They brought in an accountant from Denver, a man with no connection to the Voss network, who spent weeks buried in ledgers, gradually building a picture of systematic exploitation. Half these loans should never have been issued, he told Elara during one late-night session in what used to be Gerald's office. The interest rates were criminal, the terms designed to ensure default, the collateral requirements impossible to meet. The Vosses weren't running a bank, they were running a trap. Can it be fixed? Depends on your definition of fixed. We can restructure the legitimate debts, forgive the predatory ones, convert the bank to cooperative ownership. But a lot of people will be angry. The ones who are paying those exploitative rates, who will feel cheated that others get forgiveness while they struggled through. There's no perfect solution, only less bad options. Then we choose the less bad options and live with the consequences, Elara said. It's still better than what we had. But not everyone agreed. Marcus Webb led a faction of businessmen who'd profited under the Voss regime, and they pushed back against every reform, every redistribution, every attempt to dismantle the old power structures. They couldn't openly defend the Vosses, public opinion had turned too strongly against the family. But they could delay, obstruct, and complicate every progressive measure. You're destroying the economy, Webb argued during one particularly heated committee meeting. Redistributing land sounds noble, but what about the people who bought that land in good faith from the Vosses? Are we just stealing from them now? They bought stolen property, Edwin countered. That doesn't give them legitimate ownership. According to who? You? A convicted safecracker? Webb's smile was nasty. The territorial courts might have different opinions about property rights. He wasn't wrong, and that was the problem. The reforms Red Hollow was attempting existed in a legal gray zone, morally justified but potentially illegal under territorial law. If the wrong judge got involved, if the wrong officials took interest, everything they'd built could be dismantled by courtroom decisions. That threat materialized 3 weeks after Gerald's death, when a well-dressed man arrived on the afternoon stage carrying a leather briefcase and an air of expensive authority. He introduced himself as Cornelius Blackwood, attorney representing the Voss estate and various business interests affiliated with the late Gerald Voss. I'm here to ensure that my client's legal rights are protected during this period of transition, he explained to the hastily assembled town council, his smile polite and utterly cold. While I understand there's been some enthusiasm for reform, I must remind everyone that the Voss properties remain legitimate holdings under territorial law until a court rules otherwise. Any redistribution of assets without proper legal authority constitutes theft. The Voss assets were acquired through fraud, Fletcher stated, keeping his voice level. We have documentation of alleged fraud, which has yet to be adjudicated in any court of law. Blackwood opened his briefcase, withdrawing sheaves of papers. I have injunctions here preventing the transfer of any Voss properties pending full legal review. I also have writs demanding the return of all documents seized from Gerald Voss's offices, as they were obtained through illegal entry and therefore cannot be used as evidence. The room erupted in outrage, but Blackwood simply smiled, waiting for the noise to subside. When it did, he continued, Furthermore, I'm authorized to inform you that Calder Voss is being represented by the territory's finest defense attorneys. They're preparing to argue that the charges against him are politically motivated, that evidence was obtained illegally, and that his imprisonment itself constitutes false arrest. We expect his release within the month. Elara felt ice forming in her stomach. This was the counterattack she'd feared but hadn't fully prepared for. Not violence, but law twisted into a weapon. Money buying the kind of sophisticated legal maneuvering that could undo everything they'd accomplished. You can't be serious, Martha said, her voice dangerously quiet. That man murdered innocent people. We have witnesses, evidence. Witnesses with obvious bias, and evidence obtained through criminal means. Blackwood's expression didn't change. I understand you're upset, but the law must be followed. Otherwise, we descend into mob rule. The law was bought and paid for by the Vosses, Elara snapped. Following it now means letting murderers walk free. Then change the law through proper channels. Run for office, lobby your representatives, work within the system. Blackwood stood, collecting his papers. But until then, these injunctions stand. Any further interference with Voss properties will result in criminal charges. Good day." He departed, leaving behind a room full of people realizing that winning the war didn't guarantee winning the peace. The legal system they'd hoped would deliver justice was revealing itself to be just another tool of the powerful, one that could be wielded against them as effectively as guns had been. "We can't let this happen," Clara said into the stunned silence. "If Calder goes free, if the Voss properties stay intact, everything we fought for was pointless." "Not pointless," Fletcher corrected, though his face was grim, "but incomplete. Blackwood's right about one thing. We need legal authority to make these changes stick, which means we need allies in the territorial government, judges who can't be bought, prosecutors willing to stand against money." "And how do we get those?" Edwin asked bitterly. "The same government that enabled the Vosses for decades suddenly decided to care about frontier justice?" "We make them care," Elara said, an idea crystallizing. "Blackwood thinks he can fight this quietly, in courtrooms where money talks louder than truth. We take it public. We make this story so loud, so undeniable, that ignoring it becomes politically impossible." Martha's eyes gleamed with understanding. "The newspapers, the ones we sent documents to, they haven't published yet because they're verifying sources, making sure it's solid. We need to push them, give them more than documents. We need to give them a story that sells papers and forces action." "A trial," Fletcher said slowly. "Not Calder's trial. That's months away, if it happens at all. Our trial. A public hearing right here in Red Hollow where everyone can see the evidence, hear the testimony, watch the Voss empire dissected in daylight. We document everything, invite journalists from every major paper, and dare the territorial government to ignore what we uncover." "That's not legal," someone objected. "Neither was murder, fraud, and corruption, but that didn't stop the Vosses." Elara felt energy returning, the sense of purpose that had driven her through the darkest moments. "We tried doing this quietly, through proper channels. They blocked us. So now we get loud. We make this town a stage and force the whole territory to watch." The plan came together over the next week with the kind of desperate energy that only comes from people who know they're running out of time. They converted the town hall into a courtroom, built galleries for observers, sent invitations to every newspaper within 500 miles. The journalists came, drawn by the promise of scandal, corruption, and frontier justice. And suddenly Red Hollow found itself hosting the trial of the century, even if it had no legal standing whatsoever. Blackwood tried to stop it, of course. He filed motions, threatened lawsuits, called it a circus and a mockery of justice. But he couldn't actually prevent it. No law forbade a town from holding a public inquiry into its own affairs. And the more he protested, the more newspapers sent reporters, curious about why expensive lawyers were so desperate to prevent testimony. The proceedings began on a Monday morning with over 400 people packed into the town hall and spilling into the street outside. Fletcher served as lead prosecutor, though he had no legal credentials beyond a talent for documentation and an encyclopedic knowledge of Voss crimes. A retired territorial judge named Ambrose Shaw, a man Gerald Voss had tried and failed to corrupt years ago, agreed to preside, lending the proceedings a veneer of legitimacy. "Let's be clear about what this is and isn't," Judge Shaw announced in his opening remarks. "This is not a legally binding trial. No verdicts rendered here will have force of law. But it is an inquiry into truth conducted in full public view with evidence and testimony subject to examination. What you make of that truth is up to you." The first witness was Elara herself. She took the stand, really just a chair position so everyone could see her, and told her story from the beginning. The birthday dinner, the gunmen, the murders, the fire. She described crawling from beneath her family's bodies, clutching the silver spur that had torn from Calder Voss's boot. She recounted months of investigation, the break-in at the Voss building, the documents they'd found. "Did you know when you started this that it would lead to war?" Fletcher asked. "I knew it would lead somewhere. I didn't care where, as long as it led to truth." Elara's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "My family died because they threatened to expose corruption. I decided that their deaths would either mean something or I'd die trying to make them matter. And the violence that followed, do you regret it?" Elara looked out at the crowd, seeing faces of people who'd fought beside her, families of those who'd died in the battle, children who'd been orphaned by the war. "I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret fighting back. The Vosses built their empire on violence. They just did it slowly enough that people didn't recognize it as war. We simply made the violence visible. Witness after witness followed, each adding pieces to the portrait of systematic corruption. The Hernandez family described how forged documents had stolen their ranch. Samuel Fletcher presented the doctored land deeds, explaining in painstaking detail how signatures had been faked, dates altered, official seals counterfeited. Edwin testified about his own imprisonment on false charges, about conversations he'd overheard in territorial prison where inmates openly discussed which judges took Voss money. Elizabeth Greaves broke down describing how predatory loans had destroyed her farm, how her husband had killed himself rather than face foreclosure, how she'd been left with nothing while the Vosses added another property to their holdings. Martha presented testimony from a dozen women about Calder Voss's violence, assaults, rapes, beatings, all covered up by his father's money and influence. The journalist scribbled furiously, filling notebook after notebook. This was the story of a generation. David versus Goliath played out on the frontier, with real bodies and real stakes. The major papers had sent their best writers, and those writers were discovering that truth, when presented plainly and without embellishment, was more compelling than any fiction. Blackwood sat through it all with increasing discomfort, occasionally raising objections that Judge Shaw noted but didn't rule on. "This is an illegal proceeding, Counselor," Shaw reminded him repeatedly. "These folks are entitled to speak their truth." On the third day, they called Calder Voss himself. The marshals had refused to bring him from territorial custody. Too dangerous, they claimed, though everyone knew they were under pressure from Blackwood's legal team. So Fletcher had anticipated this and arranged an alternative, a deposition taken in Calder's cell with a court reporter present and journalists as witnesses. They'd conducted it the previous week, and now they read it aloud to the assembled crowd. The transcript was devastating. Calder, confident in his legal protections, had been arrogant and unguarded. He'd admitted to the assault on Elara's family, not in explicit detail, but enough to damn himself. He'd bragged about other crimes, dismissed his victims as problems solved, and made it clear he expected his lawyers to make all charges disappear. "The man has no remorse," Fletcher stated, reading from the transcript. "No understanding that his actions were wrong. He views murder as a business expense and justice as something money can purchase. This is who the Voss attorneys want to set free." Elara watched the crowd's reaction, the horror, the anger, the crystallizing determination. This was what they'd needed, not just evidence of crimes, but proof of the mindset that had enabled those crimes. Calder Voss's own words, condemning him more effectively than any prosecutor could. The final day of the inquiry focused on the broader corruption network. Fletcher presented the bribe ledgers, calling out names and amounts. Territorial officials, judges, sheriffs, the list went on, each entry a small betrayal that had enabled massive injustice. Some of the named officials were in attendance, their faces growing progressively paler as their crimes were cataloged publicly. Sheriff Hutchins, who'd fled Red Hollow after Gerald's death, was tracked down and served with a subpoena to appear. He showed up drunk and defiant, clearly believing his career was already over and having nothing to lose. "You want me to confess?" he slurred from the witness chair. "Fine. Yes, I took Voss money. Yes, I looked the other way. Yes, I helped cover up crimes. But I wasn't the only one, and I won't be the last. This is how the world works. The powerful do what they want, and the rest of us survive by cooperating. You think this little show trial changes that? It doesn't. The Vosses are gone, but there'll be others. There's always others." "Then we'll fight those too," Elara said quietly from the audience, "for as long as it takes." Judge Shaw delivered his final remarks on Friday evening as the sun set over a town transformed by a week of revelations. "I cannot issue a legal verdict," he stated, his voice carrying in the hushed hall, "but I can offer conclusions based on the evidence presented. Gerald and Calder Voss, along with numerous territorial officials, engaged in systematic criminal enterprise spanning decades. They murdered, defrauded, extorted, and corrupted with impunity. The only reason they succeeded was that good people remained silent, believing themselves powerless." He paused, surveying the crowd. "You are not powerless. This week has proven that. The truth, properly documented and publicly presented, is more powerful than any gun or bribe. What you do with this truth is now up to the territorial government, the courts, and ultimately the voters who elect them. But you've given them no excuse for inaction. The evidence is clear. The crimes are documented. Justice is now a choice they must make consciously, to pursue it or to ignore it. And the whole territory is watching to see which they choose. The crowd erupted in applause that lasted several minutes. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was progress. And after months of fighting in the dark, progress felt like dawn. The newspapers published their stories over the following week, and the reaction was explosive. The largest papers in Denver, Santa Fe, and even San Francisco ran front-page exposés about the Voss Empire, complete with reproductions of the forged documents and excerpts from the most damning testimony. Editorial boards called for immediate territorial investigation. Citizens groups formed demanding accountability. Politicians who'd been silent suddenly discovered passionate concern for frontier justice. The territorial governor, feeling the political winds shift, announced a special prosecutor would be appointed to investigate all Voss-related crimes. The Attorney General's office opened inquiries into every official named in the bribe ledgers. And most satisfying to Elara, Blackwood's motion to dismiss charges against Calder Voss was denied. Not just denied, but rejected with a scathing opinion from a territorial judge who cited the public inquiry's findings extensively. The evidence of guilt is overwhelming, the judge wrote. While the proceedings in Red Hollow lacked legal authority, they accomplished what our official systems failed to do. They uncovered truth. This court will not compound that failure by rewarding criminal conspiracy with dismissal on technicalities. Calder Voss would face trial. Real trial, in a real court, with a jury and rules of evidence and all the legal protections he'd denied his victims. And while nothing was certain, the odds had shifted dramatically in favor of justice. Martha found Elara on the porch of the boarding house the evening the judge's ruling was announced, watching stars emerge in the desert sky. "You did it," Martha said simply. "Everything you set out to do when you decided not to run, you did it." "We did it," Elara corrected. "None of this happens without you, Fletcher, Edwin, Rose." Her voice caught on the last name. "All of us together." "True enough, but you were the catalyst, the one who refused to accept that this was just how things were." Martha sat beside her, groaning slightly at the effort. "I'm getting too old for revolutions." "There's no such thing as too old, just too tired." "Also true." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Martha spoke again. "What now? The trial will take months, the reconstruction even longer. You planning to stay through all of it?" Elara considered the question. Months ago, she'd have said yes without hesitation. She had nowhere else to go, no life beyond the mission of destroying the Vosses. But now, with that mission largely accomplished, she found herself thinking about the future in ways she hadn't allowed herself before. "I think so. Red Hollow needs advocates, people who'll make sure the reforms stick, who'll fight any attempt to slide back into the old ways. Fletcher's good with documents, but he's not a fighter. Edwin's capable but scarred. He doesn't trust easy, and rebuilding requires trust." She looked at Martha. "Someone needs to be the bridge between fighting and building. I think that might be me." Heavy burden for someone so young. "I've been carrying heavy burdens since September. At least this one has hope attached." The night deepened around them, and Red Hollow settled into an uncertain peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles fought in courtrooms and council chambers instead of streets and canyons. But for tonight, Elara allowed herself to feel what she'd been denied for months. The satisfaction of a promise kept, a debt repaid, a wrong being gradually righted. Her family couldn't be brought back. The innocence she'd lost wouldn't return. But their deaths had meaning now, had sparked a change that would outlive everyone involved. And that, she decided, was as close to victory as grief ever got. Inside the boarding house, someone started playing piano, hesitant notes that gradually found their melody, a song about hope and tomorrow and the stubborn refusal to surrender to darkness. Elara closed her eyes and listened, feeling the music wash over her like absolution, and for the first time since that terrible September night, she allowed herself to believe that healing might be possible. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday when the work was done and the battles were won, she might wake up and discover that the weight she'd been carrying had finally become bearable. That the girl who died in the fire had been replaced by someone stronger, someone forged in grief and tempered by justice, someone capable of building instead of just destroying. The piano music continued, and Martha hummed along, and Red Hollow breathed easier under stars that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. The reckoning had come in broad daylight, witnessed by hundreds, documented for history. Whatever happened next, the truth was no longer hidden, no longer deniable. And that, Elara thought, was how empires fell and new worlds were born, not in single dramatic moments, but in the accumulation of small victories, the persistence of ordinary people who refused to accept that tyranny was inevitable. The Vosses had believed themselves untouchable, had built their power on the assumption that fear would always triumph over courage. They'd been wrong, and their fall would teach future tyrants that no empire built on suffering could stand forever, that eventually someone would remember how to fight back. The lesson was written now, in blood and testimony, in documents and graves, in a frontier town that had chosen justice over submission. Red Hollow had been reborn, and Elara Quinn had been its midwife. That was enough. That was everything.